Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. We've got some great speakers today, and then after the presentations, we have an optional hike to go look at some woodpeckers. So we're gonna get started, and then during our break in between speakers, or we'll have a short break, and then we'll come back and do some announcements, just so we make sure everyone's here for the announcements, just about, you know, what's coming next in our next few classes and some of the chapter information. But for now, I'll introduce right, Texas Forest Service. Thank you.
Good morning, y'all.
Morning.
Y'all doing all right today? What class are we on with the interns? It's our second, third, eighth? Okay. Yeah, so y'all have been here for a little bit, huh? Okay, good. My name is Connor Bernane. I am the district forester here in Conroe with the Texas A&M Forest Service. I work up here on just right here around the corner at the W.G. Jones State Forest. Y'all may have been there before, or you may have come out. We do, weekly work days on Tuesday mornings out at the forest with the Heartwood chapter. I've been there since about 2017. During that time, I worked as forester, moved up to district forester. Most recently joined our law enforcement department, assisting our law enforcement department with timber theft, wildland arson investigations, things of that nature. It's been a fun job. I've enjoyed it. The Jones State Forest is an interesting and unique place. I think we can all attest to that, given our surroundings. So today I wanted to talk to you all about forest ecology and what that means across East Texas as a whole, and the state as a whole. And wanted to go into a few definitions. If somebody could tell me, when you hear the term forest ecology, what do you think that means?
Ecology that's limited to the forest area.
Okay, I like it, defining the word with the word, right?
Safe bet.
Safe bet. Any other thoughts?
So your dominant species, plural, are trees.
Okay, good. Okay, I'll give you all the official definition. Can we, is there a way to minimize this Zoom overlay?
Yeah, if you hover over it, that little minimizing is, yeah. That's right there.
Here, we should have a clicker in here. I forgot to give you. I forgot to keep it. Will you?
Okay, so forest ecology, the study of the forest is a biological community with the interrelationships between the various trees and other organisms constituting the community, and with the interrelationships between these organisms and the physical environment in which they exist. So plain English, what does that mean?
The interactions between the organisms within a forest.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
So those organisms within this ecosystem, right, we mainly talk about trees, depending on which ecoregion of Texas that you're in will determine which tree species that we're talking about here. But not only the tree species within that ecosystem, but other species as well, right? So we think about birds, we think about other mammals, wildlife, amphibians, reptiles, things of that nature. So how they all exist and interact with one another. Another definition, what does forestry mean to you? There's the official definition coming up of what, when you hear the term forestry.
Home,
Home,
Oregon.
okay, yeah, definitely a big part of the economic impact of the state of Oregon, for sure.
The management of.
Okay, management of the forest.
Trees.
Okay, Society of American Foresters, this is the official definition. The science, art, and practice of creating, managing, using, and conserving forests in a sustainable manner to meet the desired goals, needs, and values. Those desired goals, needs, and values, how do those get determined? Is it the same goals, needs, and values for every single piece of forest land across the United States? That's dependent upon the landowner, right? Whether it's me and you who own 10 acres of East Texas piney woods, or somebody who owns 20 acres in Oregon, right? Probably pretty different goals and objectives going on there. Anybody heard of Texas A&M Forest Service before? Okay. So believe it or not, we are the state's forestry agency. Every state in the United States has a state forestry agency. The Texas A&M Forest Service serves as the state of Texas forestry agency. And our main goal is to provide statewide leadership to assure the state's trees, forests, and related natural resources are protected and sustained for the benefit of all. Texas is unique in the fact that the state's forestry agency is housed within a land grant university system. Other states out west, I used to work in Minnesota before this. I worked for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. So that's where the state's forestry agency was housed. Texas is unique, so that we are housed within the Texas A&M University system. So you hear like AgriLife Extension Service up at Airport Road, right, where Master Gardeners are at, other folks. We're all kind of sister agencies within the system. Not all of us went to A&M. I did not go to A&M. I went to Stephen F. Austin. I got my Bachelor of Science there. So I'm technically like, it's now the University of Texas at Nacogdoches, I call it. They just recently joined the UT system. Outside of providing securing the state's forests and promoting forest resources within the state, the agency is also charged with wildfire suppression for the state, as well as all hazard incident management. I went to the Panhandle last month when the Panhandle blew up with all those crazy fires up there. And then things like hurricanes, ice storms generate a lot of vegetative debris. You can imagine the amount of debris generated from Hurricane Harvey. Our agency gets involved with a lot of that disposal and management of that when those kind of events happen. Talking about the forests of Texas. When we look at the state as a whole, there's 62 million acres of forest within the state. Of that 62 million, 12 million of that is located here within East Texas. We call East Texas 43 counties. You can kind of draw a line, the I-45 corridor, everything east of the I-45 corridor would technically be your rough guiding line on that. And then everything north of I-10. This 62 million acres is the size of Louisiana and Mississippi combined. And Texas is the second largest in total forest land size in the United States. When people think of Texas, what do they think of? Like if somebody from New York thinks of Texas, what do they think of? Deserts, right? Oil wells, cowboys.
I know you.
How are you? They think of tumbleweeds blowing across the road, right? They don't always think of this great East Texas resource that we have. And with that being said, these forests in Texas account for 23% of all woodlands within the southeastern United States. So spreading from East Texas all the way up the southeastern United States, the Gulf Coast, all the way up to the Virginias, 23% of that is here within this state of Texas. A pretty fair amount of that, the southeastern wood basket, we call it. Looking at East Texas more specifically, we're all familiar with land ownership in Texas, right? It's a very privately owned state. There's not much public land. Within East Texas, of that 12 million acres that I told you, 69% of that is going to be held privately. This is going to be Uncle Jim owns his 20 acres of forest land out in East Texas, right? This is going to be private families, private land ownership that owns this property, that manage these forests. This is often passed down through families, generation to generation to generation. Industry and investment takes up 23% of that ownership. Typically, in decades past, this used to be done by the paper mills. They used to own their own forest land. That has since gone to the wayside. Companies like Temple Inland sold off all their land. And now it's represented mainly by timber investment management organizations, TIMOs, or REITs, real estate investment trusts. Your retirement accounts, your financial accounts, your investment accounts often invest in this asset, timber, to be managed. And 8% of that 12 million acres is public land. So we think of things like state parks, national forests, National Park Service, state forests, and other properties similar to that. So a very small sliver of that 12 million acres is public land. How have these forests in East Texas changed? Since 1935, East Texas has gained almost 2 million acres of forest land. A lot of this goes on in Northeast Texas, where they are converting at a very rapid pace, converting pasture land to timberland. Often folks, they get sick and tired of dealing with cattle. I don't blame them, dealing with livestock and all the nuisances that they require. And they give up on that and they switch over to timber management. As opposed to here in Southeast Texas, where rapid urbanization and urban growth is ever the manifest destiny, as we call it, right? Ever forward expanding, compromises 159,000 acres of forest land lost due to this urban development. Areas like here around the Houston Metroplex area, Beaumont, things like that, that are growing in size. This is from 2021, kind of an old data, but if I told you that Montgomery County used to be the largest wood producing county in East Texas, would you believe me? Believe it or not, it was back in the day, back in the early 1900s, Montgomery County was the largest wood producing county in East Texas. And you think of the Woodlands area, you hear names like Grogan's Mill, things like that. This is all used to be company timberland, right? It all used to be managed in a forestry. We talked about forestry, forest management, used to all be managed for timber, because timber is a resource and sustainably managed for that. But in 2021, the forest sector contributed $63.5 million in industry output and employed 399 people, with a total payroll of $12.5 million in Montgomery County. Of the 43 East Texas counties, this ranks Montgomery County 14th among all those counties, which is a pretty impressive number given our amount of urban development here in Montgomery County. All right, so we've got a little backstory on the forests of Texas. Let's talk about each of these ecoregions, and this probably is not a new concept to you all. You probably have seen this map numerous times already. Obviously, there's all the ecoregions within Texas, but let's talk about the major forest regions and what they mean and what those species that we find in each of these regions. Obviously, we know the piney woods very well. Again, you can draw a rough line along that I-45 corridor, everything north of I-10, and we can somewhat call that the East Texas piney woods. That puts Montgomery County, and then like the eastern edges of Waller County, you'll find some pine forests over there. But we're kind of get here on the southwestern fringes of the East Texas piney woods here, Montgomery County. Post oak savanna, live oak juniper, the cross timbers, and my favorite one, the mountain forest. Has anybody been out to Fort Davis, Alpine area, that kind of area there? I have a brief YouTube video. I'm not sure if it'll work in here, but a lot of ponderosa pine. So this is the pine species you find in like Colorado, the Rocky Mountains, things like that. There is a small subspecies of that present in Texas. Believe it or not.
Guadalupe Mountain.
Yes, ma'am. Out there in the Guadalupe Mountains. You also find it in the Big Bend area as well. Okay, East Texas upland forests. When we talk about, this is kind of our iconic pine savanna. If all of East Texas could look like this would be our goal. This is out near Boykin Springs, Zavala, Davy Crockett National Forest area, if you've ever been out there. Our prominent species, when we talk about East Texas upland forests and the piney woods, is obviously going to be our southern yellow pine species. And we talk about southern yellow pines, it's the big four. Loblolly is going to be king commercially. This wasn't the case back, 100 years ago, but over 100 years ago. But loblolly grows the fastest, grows the straightest, grows the tallest with minimal branching, things like that. This is the king of the commercial forest market, is loblolly pine trees. Those other three species are going to be longleaf, shortleaf. You can imagine why they get their name. The longleaf pine species have very long needles, and the shortleaf has very short needles, and slash as well. There was a big push to plant slash back in the 90s to early 2000s or so, but they were susceptible to root rot, things like that nature. So a lot of that planting projects and planting incentives have kind of gone to the wayside. and deferred back to loblolly. Other species you'll find within these upland forests is gonna be post oak, blackjack oak, southern red oak, and water oak. And then you'll always find sweet gum in these forests, always find the elm, some hickory, and then on the forest floor, you'll find some sassafras, and then often sometimes some bigger sassafras, in its tree form. Other shrub species, we're all familiar with yaupon. If you live down in this area, you are very familiar with yaupon. A lot of the management that occurs on the Jones State Forest for me, my target species to get rid of is yaupon. It is a natural and native species that is very prolific and will take over everything if not managed or maintained correctly. Some wax myrtle, and then your vines like greenbrier, muscadine, Virginia creepers, crossvines.
Question
Yes,
about
ma'am.
the yaupon, does the wildlife like the berries on the shrubs, and is there benefit there? Because I hear conflicting information about whether they're valuable for the wildlife.
I would say it's not a primary targeted species for grazers like deer, things like that. You will see some birds that prefer yaupon. Yaupon naturally produces caffeine. You'll often see people selling yaupon tea. There's a couple of people that pick yaupon on the forest and brew it down into a tea. I would just remind you that the scientific name of yaupon is Ilex vomitoria. Given that it will cause you to get sick if you consume enough of it. Yes, ma'am.
What's your major method of getting rid of the yaupon?
That's a great question. And we will talk about forest management here in a little bit, but there's a handful of different forest management practices that we do to get rid of yaupon. Like I said, it's not an invasive, it's quite native to East Texas. But the suppression and lack of fire, and I'll talk about fire and the uses of fire in East Texas, has led to this kind of overgrowth of yaupon. East Texas bottomland forests. Anybody been out to like Caddo Lake area, things like that? It's just kind of what you think of when you think of these East Texas bottomland forests. Probably the most amount of, when I think of East Texas bottomland forests, I think of like swamp tupelo, bald cypress, things like that. Some of these larger, these are trees that love to be wet. They will grow year long and wet. They will have their root systems completely drenched the entire year and grow and grow great in water. But some oak species you'll find here is going to be white oak, swamp chestnut, cherry bark, willow, water, and overcup. Other species you'll find red maple, black gum, green ash, river birch, bald cypress, and water tupelo. And then there are numerous other amount of shrubs and vine species that you'll find here. Does anybody know what's unique about bald cypress?
It loses its leaves in the winter.
That's right, and it's what? It is a conifer. It is a deciduous conifer, right? So when we think of conifers, trees with needles, conifers, they're typically evergreen, right? Our pine trees typically have their needles on all year long. But there is a handful of species across the world that are classified as deciduous conifers, meaning that they are needles and they drop those needles at the fall, winter time, right? So bald cypress is one of those species. Some people will call, we get calls all the time at the office, help, my cedar tree is dying. And it's, fall, winter time when things are losing their needles. Does it have large knees sticking up out of the ground? I mean, if you have a bald cypress, if you've seen one, they're notorious for their knees that stick up out of the ground. And then people say, yes, okay, all right, it's just a bald cypress, it'll come back, I promise, right? But there's something very unique. Other species like tamarack will do this as well. You'll find those out in the Rocky Mountains. There's some bald cypress out in the parking lot, just right here in the kind of ditch in the parking lot. It does quite well in these parking lot situations. It can take a lot of abuse and lack of care. So you'll often find it in kind of these tree coffins, I call them, these like 2x2 planting boxes that they put them in. Target parking lots, Walmart parking lots, they take a lot of abuse and can grow in those situations. I'm gonna see if this is gonna work. Promise.
He downloaded it ahead of time. You did download.
I'll try to pull that up during a break or so. Let y'all watch that. But this talked about the ponderosa pines out in West Texas, Fort Davis, Alpine area. This is the Nature Conservancy's property out in Fort Davis. They've lost a large majority of their ponderosa pine out in their property, as well as other species out there too. A lot of this has been due to beetles or wildfire, things of that nature that are occurring out there. But we've been doing a lot of planting projects out there to help encourage more ponderosa pine and helping that species recover. Succession, disturbance, and recovery. Succession is the replacement of one plant community in an area with another of a different plant composition over time. And when we talk about succession, there's two different types of it. There's primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession occurs where plant communities have never existed before. Primary succession takes thousands of years to occur, right? We talk about glacial movement. We talk about volcanic islands. We talk about sandbars, things like that. These are places where once bare, plant communities are slowly making their way there. As opposed to secondary succession, where plant communities that establish following the disturbance of one community that's already been there. Think of things like hurricanes, floods, wildfires, humans, things of that nature. Guys, I need to take a quick break. I'm very sorry about this. I'll be right back.
That's really.
All right, sorry about that, guys. A quick phone call there. Secondary succession. Okay, this happens almost every single day in our lives. Can somebody think of outside of a hurricane, flood, wildfire, what is a form of secondary succession that you can think of that occurs maybe in your backyard or something?
Weeds taking over.
Weeds taking over, right? If you use like a weed killer and maybe buy you some time for a couple months, but then what comes back? More weeds, right?
Take care of your soil.
That's right. In a forest setting, and I'll go into more of this, if we do like a timber harvest in the forest setting, and I don't manage anything after that. Okay, I'm gonna cut down all these pine trees, and then we'll see what happens after that. What species do you think? I'll tell you what's gonna come back. If I don't plant pine trees, what's gonna come back is yopon very aggressively, and then sweet gum's gonna be in there too.
Yep.
You'll probably hear me bash sweet gum a lot while I'm up here, but there is no real commercial value for sweet gum. Folks tend to hate it for the spiky balls that it drops.
Yeah.
Sucked up on your lawnmower, things like that. Chinese tallow, yes, another great example of invasive species that we don't want, that often invades these forest setting. Very dependent, sunlight dependent, right? And you'll see them growing and they will outcompete these pine trees or other species that we really want to grow in their place. So it takes a lot of management, a lot of scheduling and making sure you're doing things correctly after these disturbances. But again, two different forms of succession here, primary, secondary. Can somebody take a look at this? What are some similarities you see between the two here? Between these stages?
That text is really small.
I'm sorry.
Well, it's the same grass as small. Oh, pioneer.
Three stages.
Well, and it's hundreds of years at the top and about 150 to get to the climax.
Right. Yeah, so that's a big thing we noticed, right? So with primary succession, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of years that this process happens. And you're seeing the same thing, right? We're going from our pioneer species to our intermediates to our climaxes.
I'm gonna try to get that
Well,
Zoom
it's-
thing off.
You're looking at the development of the soil too, because you're going, I mean, even if you look at the pictures where you have disturbance, you have a nice
aged soil all the way across, where primary succession, if
Right.
you're looking at rock, you've
Yeah.
got some
Yeah.
breakdown time and some.
As we see our soil profile develop a little bit deeper, a little bit more organic matter develops in that soil profile. But yeah, that's a great point. We start at the beginning of primary succession, we're looking at bare rock and not much good soil activity there, right? There's no wonder why there's no plant community there growing.
Lichens, what are you talking about? That's algae, fungi.
Yeah, but then in our first stage, then we move into lichens, small annuals, things like that.
I got to be on Mount St. Helens after it blew up. And like a year or two after working for the Forest Service there, and they actually, the first species that came in was a lupin.
That was what?
Lupin,
Oh, okay, awesome.
so I didn't saw it there. Other than, ash.
So you'll see here, as we go into our intermediate stages, this is where you'll see your grasses, shrubs, and your shade intolerant trees, such as pines, right? They require sunlight to grow effectively. And then as you move into that climax community, that's when you really start seeing a large majority of your deciduous oaks, things of that nature, hickories. A lot of your pine component starts to go away as you move into this climax community. Okay, so let's walk this through here. Stage one, we have some sort of disturbance that occurs, whether it be hurricane, tornado, ice storm, wildfire, humans. I think we're in Texas, I think we're subject to all of those. Stage two, we have the pioneer stage. This is the development of pioneer species of shade intolerant grasses, shrubs, and weeds. These are very poor competitors and require absolute full sunlight to grow. During this stage, the pioneer species are providing foraging and habitat for birds, rats, mice, reptiles, these smaller animals, right? Stage three, this is where the trees start coming in. This is again going to be your very shade intolerant tree and shrub species. Your pines, your cedars, your hackberries, things that are very fast growing, grow quickly, and require that full sunlight to grow. As they are growing, they will begin to shade out and outcompete those original pioneer species, grasses, shrubs, things of that nature. Okay. Thusly, they are providing foraging habitat for a little bit more mammals there. We've got some squirrels, possums, raccoons, and things coming in. And then finally, we reach our climax stage. This is the development of the climax forest of shade-tolerant species like your oaks and your hickories, things that will tolerate some shade and will grow perfectly fine in that kind of shaded environment. This is a stable and self-maintaining and reproducing state of the forest. Gap phase succession, this can occur within this climax community. So you'll often hear in forest management, we do things like gap clear cuts or patch clear cuts. These are very small, half-acre size clear cuts within this climax community. And then you kind of restart this secondary succession stage over again in a smaller environment. We create these things, wildlife, deer in particular, love this kind of edge effect when you talk about going from, like if we have a climax community on this side and then we do some sort of timber harvesting in there and you kind of go back down to that shade intolerant phase where you have more pines, they love this kind of edge effect, we call it, between the two ecoregions of that. They love to kind of drive in throughout there and live in that area.
But then
Quick.
won't the weeds and everything take over? Because you've cleared it?
Yes, yeah, and then you got to do some other forest management in there as well to kind of keep down the weeds and control those weeds. Yes, sir.
So we call it the East Texas Piney Woods. Are we not at the climax level when you get up in the Piney Woods, or is that?
So take that, like, it will depend on which ecoregion you're in that will determine your climax community, right? With that being said, yes, there will always be some sort of pine component within the East Texas Piney Woods. It just depends on the amount of it that's there, and then your hardwood amount as well, too. A lot of this depends on the level of forest management that's happening too, because the Jones State Forest, is over hundreds of years old, and I've particularly managed to reduce the amount of hardwoods out there so that I can provide habitat. You'll hear later, so I can provide a habitat for the red cockaded woodpecker. Yes, sir.
So is this process continuously happening right after each hurricane, after each kind of storm, where you guys determine, okay, what's the plan, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or is this something that, you guys agree on every 5 years as part of more of a strategic plan?
It will depend, this happens without, any government involvement, any personal involvement, right? This is happening, whether there's any human interaction or involvement or not. When it depends on the type of event, hurricane, wildfire, tornado, the land ownership, who owns the property itself, and then their goals, will kind of guide you to a path of what you want to happen. Typically within a large scale wildfire, the Panhandle, for example, that's not a good representation of East Texas piney woods, but obviously over 1 million, the largest wildfire in Texas history, the Smokehouse Creek Fire, burns 1 million acre plus of prime grazing land for landowners up in the Panhandle. They are dependent upon that grass for their livestock, for their livelihoods, right? So then you see things like some sort of cost share program funding, and you see people donating hay, things like that to help kind of speed the process along, and then as well as, what are some recovery efforts that we can be doing to encourage these grasses to come back. So whether it be seeding the land that was burned or encouraging that to come back. But yes. In a more East Texas scenario, you'll see tornadoes occur. You'll see things like salvage harvesting. So even if that wood is torn down by a tornado, that's still valuable. You can still get in there and harvest that wood. And then you can look at replanting efforts after that.
So when I'm in the forest, I see a lot of pine trees being cut down.
Mhm.
Why?
Again, depends on the ownership.
No, this is, W.G. Jones.
Here. So a lot of that is going to happen either because lightning strike trees, if it's a hardwood species, and I'm managing that part of the forest for red cockaded woodpecker, then I try to reduce the amount of hardwood component within there because they require living pine trees to grow.
No, this is living pine tree being cut down, but I see logs just lying around.
Then it's some sort of maybe training exercise. We don't typically target the live trees unless they've been lightning struck or have beetle damage or something like that. Does this make sense, Sarah? The kind of succession as we go through those?
Mhm.
This whole process is driven by how these plant communities mature and how they grow older, right? Disturbances from these external factors will alter the process overall. And these disturbances after the progression of succession alter this progression by either taking the community to an earlier stage of succession or taking it to a later stage of succession. So again, here's just another quick few examples of disturbances. We talked about a couple of these: insects, diseases, ice, hail, urban development, forest management. You have a feller buncher here, removing pine trees from the property.
What about adding invasive plants to that list? Because I know that I can't remember the name of the grass, but there's Georgia, the state of Georgia actually has a website dedicated to it. It's last time I looked at a map, it's just on the eastern border of Texas and Louisiana established, and it's a rhizomatous grass that takes over the pines. No, it's not Johnson grass. It's actually an Asian grass that got brought in on a ship. And it causes wildfires, but I mean, it's so terribly invasive, it excludes the native understory species. So, I mean, I would put something like that on the list just because it's maybe not a problem right now, but it will be. And then you get people, one particular landowner that I know of that I worked with for a while was bringing in Australian trees, and those trees
Eucalyptus.
are fire climax, so those seeds will germinate as soon as the fire hits it, and it's like there's a disaster waiting to happen.
So the introduction of invasive species, if not managed correctly, if not identified, if the state of Georgia doesn't, I assume they have this website to help eradicate the species.
Yes, but it's like I said, it's spreading across the South.
Yes, I mean, time and time again, right? Some sort of invasive starts on the East Coast, typically from a shipping port. and then makes its way west across the country, and it causes devastation behind it, right? So, and when we talk about invasive species and disturbances across these regions, these forest ecoregions, if not managed and if not identified correctly, it can have long-term effects on the overall succession of that community, right? Yes, ma'am.
What kind of disturbance would move to the latest?
Okay, here's some examples. Wildfire prescribed burn. What effect will this disturbance have on its succession, and will it move us to an earlier or later stage?
Depends on where you.
Yeah, it depends on if the seed bank is one that is reinvigorated by fires, basically.
So let's take a prescribed burn. Prescribed burn is very intentional. It's not just some random occurrence, right? If you go out to the forest today, I burned on Thursday, so you'll still see some smoke out there. But you will see kind of what that looks like in a forest setting. This is very low intensity fire. This doesn't happen, this doesn't occur in the forest canopy, right? Which is a canopy fire, which will cause long-term mortality impacts on the pine trees. This occurs on the forest floor. And again, I'm targeting yopon, sweet gum, Chinese tallow, things like that, right? I'm trying to get rid of those so I can encourage more pine growth, more seedlings, natural regeneration from these pine trees in the forest understory. So let's take that, let's use prescribed burning. Let's not say that's a devastating wildfire that's wreaked havoc. Let's think of prescribed burning, low intensity kind of fire, rejuvenating the native seed bank in the soil.
That move it to a later stage?
Right? So as we move it along to a later stage, we kind of move out of this kind of pioneer stage, right? Almost. And then as we encourage more pine growth to come in, we're kind of pushing that phases of succession along. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Let me do that. Southern pine beetle outbreak. This is a very iconic picture of East Texas. You're looking at about 200 acres there of a southern pine beetle outbreak. We haven't had a southern pine beetle outbreak since the late 90s, early 2000s. This picture was done. This is an aerial image from Dr. Ron Billings, our entomologist that used to work for us. Of southern pine beetle. So you can see kind of the center of where these outbreaks occur. Southern pine beetle is again, it's a native pine beetle species. It's a cousin of the mountain pine beetle. If you've been to the Rocky Mountains and seen kind of the devastation that happens there in the Rocky Mountains. Again, it's a native species, but it will cause this widespread outbreak. If you have pine trees in your own property and you've lost them to bark beetles before, you probably have. It would be two different other species. It'd be like black turpentine beetle or Ips beetle. And these two species really target individually stressed pine trees. They're not going to cause this 200-acre outbreak, right? And kill everything in sight. Unfortunately, the only way to really manage this is to get out ahead of it and create buffer strips. So we'll take, out here, we'll just start clearing trees and just make a giant circle to help prevent the spread of this.
How wide is your border? How wide do you cut that?
It depends, right? It could be a 5 acre wide.
Yeah, I was gonna say, cause those beetles.
It has to be significant because they got some good distance. All right, they fly, right? They got some good distance. Yeah.
There's no other way.
Not really. Well, proactively, forest management, yes, can help prevent that.
How?
So thinning your tree, they attract one another through pheromones, right? Just like other things. So as they start embedding themselves in these trees, they start releasing pheromones that attracts more and more of them. Typically, this happens in unmanaged forests where there has been no thinning operations, there hasn't been any tree removal, things like that. There's too many trees present here that can be sustained on the landscape effectively. So coming in and reducing that amount of trees present allows for more airflow throughout the tree canopy and helps disperse those pheromones more effectively.
So as a private landowner, how do I manage my land?
It depends on your goals. If timber management is one of your goals, then there are several things that we'll go into that you can do. If timber management isn't one of your goals, then, often the recommendations we make work for another. Wildlife management, aesthetics, recreational opportunities, things like that. But let's take this example of insect outbreak. What effect will this disturbance have on succession? Are we going to be moving from an earlier or later stage? It's gonna pull us back, right? So think we're in our shade intolerant kind of phase right now. We have our trees present, right? Our pine trees present. As we lose all of them, we're gonna have to go all the way back to the beginning of our stages of succession, right?
In terms of managing this, do you guys go through and torch that after that happens?
Often, we'll try to salvage as much as we can, but yeah, then you're looking at piling and
Torch
burning, and piling and burning, yes, ma'am.
You don't do a widespread, a slash burn?
You can do like a prescribed burn kind
Yeah.
of through it,
Yeah,
but it's important to, dispose of all that infected wood.
yeah, that's what
Well,
I'm saying, 'cause if you just did pile burning, it wouldn't seem like it would get rid of all of the beetle.
Yeah, so you could salvage what you could, the rest of it you would pile and burn, and then a good prescribed burn just across it. Across the majority of the stand would help as well. Unmanaged areas of national forest in East Texas is where this typically occurred. We had our outbreaks on the Jones Forest as well. You'll still see gaps in the forest canopy today from southern pine beetle outbreaks.
Do you know when this picture was, like, when did this occur?
I don't, again, I want to say it's the late 90s, this picture.
It's pretty obvious from aerial view, but when you're out walking the woods, how can you tell, does the wood look different when there's an insect outbreak?
With bark beetles in particular, your first initial signs of an attack is gonna be the dying of the needles. So you'll start seeing them turning reddish, orangish, reddish, brown to dead.
I mean, you can see it from here where it's starting to attack, so those needles are turning yellow. So when you're doing a hike through it, you start to see the entire canopy go shades lighter. Then you know the forest is in trouble, in one way or another.
It can be somewhat hard to tell, but if you ever spend much time looking at like satellite imagery of kind of forest landscapes, you can kind of pick up on the different colors, particularly if it's in like color infrared imagery. But you can see like some of these here in the center have long dead, lost their needles already. As you work your way out, you start seeing kind of that orangish, brownish hue. And then working out even more, you start seeing more of just a yellowish kind of almost as they're getting infected as they move out.
Just depends upon where the trailhead is, right? So if the trailhead starts where it's already dead, and you may be moving into green, just watching your canopy and seeing how the canopy changed.
So no matter the disturbance, there's always some sort of plant community that will come in behind to reestablish itself, right? Even if it's an invasive plant species that comes in, there's some sort of plant community that's readily available and adapted to move in after that. When we talk about forest management, there's kind of two different forms that we can talk about. And this occurs after timber harvesting, this occurs after a tornado in East Texas, this occurs after Hurricane Harvey sweeps through Southeast Texas and knocks down hundreds of acres of managed pine forests. But we talk about natural regeneration and artificial regeneration. Natural regeneration, we're relying on the residual standing trees. We'll call these the parent trees, the mother trees. They will be responsible for the next cohort of trees that come in through natural regeneration. As they drop their pine cones, these seeds spread and they will germinate and create the next crop. So here's an example. We have a mature stand. We're talking forest management now. We have a mature stand of pine trees here. We're going to come in and do a seed tree cut. A seed tree cut is when we identify those parent trees. These are the biggest, tallest, straightest, fewest minimal branching trees that we can find on the property. And we're going to leave, depending on our objective, maybe 5 to 10 of these trees per acre. These are often your most valuable trees. So economically speaking, they're often your most valuable, right? They're straightest, tallest, biggest. So it's important to identify those beforehand so the logger doesn't come in and remove those trees. But we've identified those, and then those are going to be responsible for the next cohort. You'll see them as the younger seedlings start establishing themselves and growing and maturing. And then once they reach a certain stage, then you come in and remove those parent trees. Because if those are left, then you get overstocking. You get way too many seedlings in there and you can't manage that effectively. And then you go back to the tending stage and the mature stage, and then you can start over from there. So that's an example of natural regeneration, right? We're relying on the standing residual trees to reproduce for us. Benefits of this, as compared to artificial regeneration, I'm buying seedlings, I'm having them planted by somebody in the ground. Obviously, natural regeneration is much cheaper. I'm not having to purchase the seedlings, I'm not having to pay somebody to plant them. With that being said, you have a wide range of understocking versus overstocking. Too few trees, too many trees, depending on how well those mother trees spread that crop. And if not managed correctly, you can have, you know, long-term devastating effects. Yes, sir.
How long is that process?
When I talk about traditional commercial forest management in East Texas, and if it's a pine plantation, you could do a full final harvest at like age 32 years.
When you guys are going in and hand planting or pre-inoculating those mycorrhiza?
No. Well, the seed, depending on the seedling that you purchase, it can be a bare root seedling or containerized seedling that they're grown before. And then you put them in the ground, but there's typically no sort of soil amendments or anything added to it during that phase.
You can't get away with that without the spur.
Sorry.
I said you can't get away with that without the spur.
Oh,
You have to
yes.
pre-inoculate.
Just wonder how you balance, you know, because if you do that, then you target, you leave the loblolly pines more than maybe some of the other pines. Right? I mean.
You could,
balance
yeah.
between climax and the predecessor.
You could, right? So obviously loblolly is the commercial king, right? If I want to have, if I'm managing my property for income, I want some return on my investment for this, then yes. If I'm looking at more of like ecosystem restoration, I could maybe leave some longleaf there. We're kind of on the western fringes of the native longleaf range, and it's really not that much planted anymore. But if I had some longleaf present on my property and I wanted to do some of that restoration, then I could do that. I just need to know that longleaf is going to grow much slower. If you know anything about longleaf, it sits in what's called a grass stage for about 5 to 7 years, where it looks like a literal clump of grass in the ground. After that, and it does require prescribed burning. If you can't commit to prescribed burning, then I'll try to take you away from longleaf all day long. But if you do have the opportunity to plant, if you do have the opportunity to prescribe burn on your property, then longleaf could be an option for you. Just know that it will take you much longer to kind of get a good tree out of it.
When you're doing your prescribed burns, the next spring season, are you seeing more else?
I typically don't see any on the Jones, not too much. You do see some mushrooms here and there.
No, but specifically morels, because they'll usually come in after a burn.
Yeah, I don't see too many often in this area. So that's natural regeneration as opposed to artificial regeneration. So again, the benefits of a natural regeneration process is it's much cheaper for you to do. The downsides to that is you get a wide range of stocking, which could cause, if it's too understocked, you're gonna have to come in and interplant. You will have to purchase seedlings or pull seedlings out of the ground where there's too many and plant them in areas where they're understocked. Artificial regeneration, I am purchasing seedling. This typically happens like if you think of the big, bad, terrible clear cuts, you know, the iconic images of how bad forestry is. Where there's no standing trees left, then you'll come in, you'll purchase those seedlings and then plant those in the ground. And those, obviously, you're gonna have a higher initial cost there at planting, but you can put those on a very specific planting density and spacing, right? And I can put those on an 8x10 spacing, and I know exactly how many trees per acre that I planted on that property. When we look at East Texas piney woods, when we're doing artificial regeneration, you're typically looking at planting densities upwards of 800 trees per acre. With the ultimate goal, you assume that you're going to have some mortality throughout this process. You assume that you're going to do maybe some thinnings here or there, but then at final harvest, you're looking somewhere in the range of like 350 to 400 trees per acre at the final stages of that. Yes, ma'am.
Near me, there's a lot of, where I live, there's a lot of, clear cutting going on for construction.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when they replant trees, it seems like they don't stagger things, they just replant, like it'll be a lot of the same species all at once. And so, to me, I feel like the canopy, it's gonna start blocking each other out because they're the same type of tree and they're planted at the same time.
Is that a neighborhood that you're talking? Okay.
Wood.
Kingwood,
So
okay.
it's like, and so I wonder, if there are guides or resources or ways that are not inside of like y'all's heads that we could give areas that are just about to do that. Hypothetically.
So when I see this happen for like development, when pine forests are cut down, they're cut, removed, and it's a new subdivision going up, right? Typically, the developer comes in, they start building their homes, and it's gonna be 2 live oaks planted in the front yard. And they're gonna be probably a foot away from the home. And the size of the yard, if we know anything about live oaks, right, they grow much wider than they do tall, right? The size of this yard, this little square yard that you have cannot accommodate 2 live oaks, right? But for whatever reason, live oaks are commercially grown and readily available in the thousands, if not millions, to these developers. It's just the tree of choice down here. It's cheap, it's effective, you put 2 in the ground, and it typically meets the requirements of local planting codes, right? Where I think a lot of good can be done is some of these, and I interact with them a lot of HOA communities, or advisory boards, things like that. If you're subject to an HOA, they may have certain species restrictions on you. And I sometimes, unfortunately, I see them recommending things that they shouldn't be, invasives, non-natives, things like that. But I think a lot of headway can be done into those types of communities on recommending strong native tree species that accommodate not your top story of the forest canopy, right? So your dominant species, your pines, your larger oaks, things, but some of those mid-story canopy trees, things like maples, eastern redbuds, flowering dogwoods, things like that, that kind of give you that variation in forest canopies level. So that I can have maybe 1 live oak in my yard, but then on the other side of my yard, I could put an eastern redbud.
Yeah. I'm
Which is
thinking
more-
more of commercial areas, like where they're developing like a strip of.
Sure.
stuff, And they plant those little tree
The
coffins.
tree
or whatever,
coffins, yes, ma'am.
And, maybe catching them before they plant stuff to at least stagger the species.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's like a resource that I could point them to or, because y'all know what you're doing, but they're not gonna hire you.
It's
So-
tough, it's tough, coming from personal experience, it's tough to make headway into these kind of like large commercial development operations.
The reason why is because they have big landscape companies that are coming in and they're not looking at the ecology, they're looking at the design.
Yeah.
And to have species interplanted is oftentimes considered bad design. And what they're trying to do is produce beauty rather than, an ecologically viable situation.
Like maple, dogwood, and what else it was?
Bradford pear.
Tree coffins in particular exist because they try to maximize parking space, right? They gotta have a certain amount of parking spots available for the size of the building that they're making. And we also have to have a certain amount of trees on the property to meet local ordinances, local planting codes. So we're gonna make this 1 by 1 square box in the parking lot, and we're gonna throw a bald cypress in it. and we're gonna call it good.
So what, we don't have leverage with the ordinance?
I would say that the opportunity to approach local ordinance codes and make headway in that direction would probably be my best recommendation. That's a daunting task.
Got a lot.
Tell them, girl.
And that takes finding the correct politician that has an interest and wants to support you in that, but it's something that it's not unique to Southeast Texas. It's not unique to Kingwood. It's a problem that exists across the state, across the country.
Like the Bradford pear going everywhere.
Yes, the Bradford pear, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Can I get your thoughts on
popular tree. It's becoming more popular, and I've kind of seen it on the Texas A&M. I think it's what, maybe their AgriLife site somewhere, where they talk about it's a beautiful tree and it's a good option for those smaller yards in the communities that you were just talking about. It's a Chinese French tree. It's not a native. There is a native version. A native French tree, but the Chinese French tree is more popular because it's just more showy, has a lot more blend.
Mhm.
It's not considered invasive. But do you have a perspective on that tree?
I'm not quite sure why A&M recommends that tree. It can be hard to find good native flowering tree species here for us in Southeast Texas. I gave some recommend, Eastern Redbud, I already said that one. Magnolia, if you like that one as well, is another good one. It can be difficult to find that, and often folks really just want like the biggest, showiest tree that they can. And more often than not, like there is the American French tree option. The Chinese French tree, again, on a commercial like landscape developer basis as well, is just more readily available too. I will always defer folks back to the native species before I make recommendations elsewhere.
What you're doing is you're battling nurseries and landscapers who will get you away from southern magnolia and eastern redbud because they're considered trashy, not because it's a trashy tree, but because it has so much glitter.
Yeah.
So there's one of the arguments.
Any questions up to this point? We're gonna get more in depth with forest management. Yes, ma'am.
Coming back to the pine beetles and last year's drought, when there's an event like a drought that weakens the trees, then do things like the pine beetles get a chance to come in more? And is it also like oak wilt, or what should we be looking for based on last year's extreme weather?
So, first part of your question, that yes, particularly those other two that I mentioned, that most of, if you have a pine tree in your yard that you've lost to pine bark beetle, it's probably been one of those black turpentine or Ips beetle. Yes, they detect these kind of individually stressed trees and attack those primarily. Stress can be attributed from droughts. It can be attributed from freezes. So let's think back 2021. And these compounding factors, let's see, what in 2021, I think that was when we had the big snowstorm, right? So we had that. Let's see, not this most recent summer, but the summer before that, we also had a drought. And then this most past summer that we just came out of, we had another drought as well. So you think about these compounding factors, and it goes back decades, right? Before you may start seeing some of these side effects. But yes, you were kind of headed out of the bark beetle season, I will say. But yeah, the drought does have an impact on that, and you will see increased activity in bark beetles. Oak wilt is not something that we really deal with too much in this area. It is very much a real and serious threat to Central and West Texas kind of hill country landowners. For our foresters in Central and hill country Texas, their primary job is oak wilt suppression and making recommendations to landowners on what we can do to kind of address that crisis, I'll call it. Oak wilt's not too much of a concern here for us. Master gardeners, I tell them to, and I tell everybody that pruning paint really isn't necessary anymore. When you look at pruning, there's been a lot of research done past decade or so that often pruning paint kind of slows down this process of callus tissue developing on the wound. Unless you are at risk of oak wilt, then yes, you need to be using pruning paint all the time.
What does that mean, pruning?
When you make it, when you're pruning your trees in your yard, and you typically, it's always recommended to use some sort of pruning paint. It's a spray paint that you spray over the tree to kind of seal the wound. But it can slow the process of that tree naturally. Like when I get a scab, when we cut our hand or our arm or something like that, it's kind of that native scabbing process for the tree.
So don't spray.
Don't use it unless you have property or you're doing something in oak wilt territory.
Are all oaks susceptible to the oak wilt, or just certain ones in particular?
I forget off the top of my head. I want to say it's the red oak group that is susceptible to it.
And on that same, droughts, part of the cost of that.
Yes, and as well as oak wilt is spread through not only insects, it's also spread through root systems. So you'll see recommendations of trenching, where we come in with big disc blades and literally in the ground and separate those root systems. But again, that's why the pruning paint is recommended, because those insects and beetles will spread that as well through those wounds. Those open wounds.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Are there certain mushrooms that grow around the trees that you can't even see the damage yet, but you know, there's damage in the roots?
Yes, you will see decay like that, mushroom, like if you start seeing like shelf fungus, things like that on a tree, a very good sign of internal decay and rot in the tree. Like when somebody calls and tells me that they think their tree is dying, and that's like the number one thing I'm looking for is some sort of like shelf fungus developing on the bark or trunk. Are we good with a break, like five, whatever y'all's break is, 5, or do we want to keep going? Okay. Sounds good. 10 minutes, sounds good. Okay, 9:15. Yes, ma'am.
So I have, but this is actually, it's a good time for me.
Speed?
Yeah, and I'm not, it has been an exception. I haven't done anything, but I just bought it, but. Sure. What do I need to do?
You do have a timber exemption on it?
Yeah.
You need to do something. I can get you the Sabine there's a forester that covers Sabine County,
Okay,
and you can reach out to him and help him
yeah,
out.
that'll be nice,
Okay.
because I reached out to the national, Sabine National Park.
Oh, they won't help you.
They said, yeah.
There's like my counterpart that covers Sabine County. I can
Okay,
get you his
great,
info.
so
Yes, ma'am.
if you'll give me your phone.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say hello. You know, I've stopped by over there a few times. And, I told the young lady in there that's their resident of Forest to do the forest. And, we went over there and it's already pristine. Right? I mean, there's some area down in the creek that we didn't think that it would be conducive to some, especially our seniors getting down there.
Okay.
But maybe I missed an area that you think Phil is more litter prone.
The south side tends to generate a lot of, were you just looking at the north side of the forest?
The,
We're at the creek,
The creek, okay.
we went
next to the reserve, Janice Reserve.
Gotcha.
and then we did go across and walk around too. There were a lot of doggy bags where people, dogs,
What's
like
that about?
piles with that.
So I don't have any trash cans on the forest, because people, if you've seen like a textile like roadside stop, and you see just like mounds of garbage, and people will throw couches at these places. So I'm trying to avoid that. But yes, the doggy bag kind of volcanoes do appear.
So you all have to pick that up.
Yes.
Someone, that's too bad. Have y'all, are you able to put, like, so you don't want to put in a place to put the dog?
I'm like this far away from doing it, like 1 or 2.
Okay, that might help.
That's a fairly new thing that's happening. I mean,
Because more people are.
more
have
people are in
discovered
there, I
it, and
suppose.
It's
Yeah.
pretty packed on the
The
weekend.
Tuesday crew that works on the forest typically goes out and tries to go on doggy bag patrol. Again, it's not the most glamorous job.
Yeah.
Nor do I want to like recommend folks, like, hey, don't pick up dog food.
And if you do see an area where it's starting to get bad, maybe we just missed it, but
Okay.
it's not deeper in the creek. I'm Tammy.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you have my email,
Yeah,
so just
great.
let me know, and I can rally enough people to get in there if I
Awesome.
need it.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Am I asking you some hard questions like where else?
You're good. I don't get moral questions much for East Texas.
Well, I haven't gone mushrooming out here that much. I need to get out. And take some looks around, see what's going on. What I really need is a microscope and the right stains. But yeah, typically what you see is Amanita, Death Angel. See a lot of that. I've seen a little bit of Amanita muscaria. Some not Russula, but the ones with pores on the underside. I have that with my oak. My oak is sick. I have a great big gigantic live oak. It's probably a couple 100 years old and it's very, very sick. It was sick when I moved in. Um,
I'm a magnolia.
Magnolia. Mine did too.
sorry.
My magnolia died too this past summer.
It's got, and I should know what it is, but I gotta dig out my mycology notes. It's got a polypore on it that's forming a pink plaque.
It's not like Ganoderma or anything.
It's not a conch, it's like a plaque, but it is polypore.
Okay.
So it's a nice hard polypore, but I haven't been able just by searching pink polypore, be able to find it. So when I moved, my everything sort of got misplaced and it never got misplaced. It sort of ended up, stuff ended up in the garage and it just sort of sat there and never really dug everything out. So yeah, I'm not really sure what that is, other than a pink plaque polypore. Yay. And I know that I have keys out in the garage, but I don't have keys to that. Most of my keys are to ascomyces.
Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head. I'm not the best mushroom fungus guy.
Yeah,
What were you asking?
We were talking
like
about,
this? I sponsor a Christian club
what's wrong with.
at Oakwood High School, and I'm also a budding realtor.
Okay.
The 24th of May is my
My
last
birthday
day
month,
of
so I was like, I
teaching.
wanted to get.
But you know what I'm doing? If you want to buy a
I
house.
love that. Just get better at doing.
Well, you saw mine. You saw where I'm.
Yeah,
I want to buy that.
It's not quite as good as this one.
No, I can't, actually. No.
Semi-ambidextrous,
Yeah,
always have been.
really good.
When I was teaching people crochet, I had a lefty. So I had to teach myself to crochet with my left hand, so I could teach her to crochet with
Oh my,
her left hand.
that's a dedicated teacher right there.
And I did it. I managed to do it. Yeah.
It's on my to-do list, crochet. Me and my daughter, I just can't get it taught enough.
Do you have business cards with you?
I believe I gave them all out the other day, but I will have my info up here soon.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Sam Caleb, he's in our Nacogdoches office. He covers Sabine County.
Okay,
He's my counterpart up there.
okay. And the other thing I don't know is like my boundary gaps, so who will help me with that? Like I have a survey, but I can't read the survey.
Okay, there are like, talk to Sam and he can give you recommendations on boundary companies that they'll spray paint it, or fencing companies that'll mark it.
Okay, that would be good, because I've seen here, like, some content taking protein where they shouldn't be.
Just constantly picking up pots, as you know, at the nursery.
Do you have his email?
Yes.
Because the email not respond to my, that's the office number, correct?
So I really couldn't do anything like this, and so now I can. It's been the first time in years,
Pretty.
like, that I can do stuff like this. So I'm like, what's it called? Now it's like, it's my makeup.
Yeah. It'll put together.
So I'm giving a presentation or something. Yeah. But
Thank you so much.
You don't need it. But yeah, it's nice, like icing on the cake.
So there's
Love
two
it. I was
M's
still
over here
very
for this
put
email?
together with my nail.
Oh, it's just one E, one M.
One app.
One M, CCALIP at
Oh, no.
CFS.
Dot TAMU.edu.
1.5. I would,
Yeah,
I can't.
because I did call them.
let me do it for my birthday.
Well, the Texas clogs. But on Texas clogs, right?
I know, I was cutting out the longest. I just
People,
got,
happy
I
to help
need
you.
some more volume, so I got it.
Thank you so much.
Like a jump jet. What is it? You put it in like a ponytail or something and then bring it to the front? I don't know.
I mean, I'm trying to get.
I really. What's a good amount? Yeah. You know, if you go to Supercuts, they have like coupons on Facebook for selling. Which one? I don't know. I don't know. We don't have. They're also great buckets. Do y'all have problems with the invasive orange tree in a Jones Forest?
Not too much.
I know
It's
some
just too much
parts.
Yopon for anything else to go.
I bet. I bet.
That's a good point.
All right, we ready to go?
Yeah.
At 10, are we going with you to the Jones Forest?
Donna is coming in at
Donna.
10.
Okay.
But I will be up there.
Oh.
Okay, so we talked about the forests of Texas, we talked about East Texas, we talked about primary, secondary succession. Let's get a little bit into forest management. And this is kind of what commercial forest management, forest management looks like, particularly here in East Texas. Some of these you'll kind of see across the country depending on where you're at. But before we get into that, I believe most of us in this room are kind of familiar. There's two schools of thought when you think of traditional land management. You have the concept of preservation versus conservation. Can somebody kind of tell me the differences? And you may not know the differences. You may kind of think they're interchangeable. Two kind of very distinct differences here when we talk about preservation versus conservation.
Allowing you to do its own thing, not allowing you to involve in it.
Okay. And it may help to think of, again, this is kind of what helps me think of it. I think of like the federal land management agencies. I think of the National Park Service within the Department of the Interior and the United States Forest Service within the Department of Agriculture. Your average day-to-day person may think that a national forest is the same thing as a national park, managed by the same people, or the wildlife refuges are the same. But these are two very different agencies. And I don't like to use the federal government as a good example of anything.
You're being recorded.
That's okay. I'll say it again.
That's funny.
But this is kind of a good way to think about it, that these are two very different agencies with two very different overall goals. So preservation, this is kind of what you think of when you go to a national park. This is what the land looked like before human encroachment, human involvement, right? Now, there's obviously going to be some similarities between the two. Both of these agencies, both of these kind of ideologies recognize that kind of wilderness, the federal wilderness areas, like there's one here in the Sam Houston National Forest, that there's the wilderness. But kind of these areas that should be free of any sorts of human encroachment or involvement. Idea of preservation kind of pioneered by John Muir, and allow for nature to maintain its current course. As opposed to the United States Forest Service, where yes, there is some room there for this idea of preservation, but there's also this concept of multi-use forest management. So the forest can be used for multitude different reasons. It can be used for recreation, it can be used for timber management, it can be used for hunting, for watershed management, things of that nature. And this concept, kind of the person attributed to this most is Gifford Pinchot, considered the father of forestry for the country. Anybody happen to know who the father of forestry is for the state of Texas? There's a hint. You're going to see his forest later. William Goodrich Jones is considered the father of forestry in Texas. He spent some time kind of in Europe and on the East Coast learning these ideas of sustainable forest management. This is at a time when all of East Texas, late 1800s, early 1900s, is getting clear cut across the landscape. There's no real plan in place for replanting or good forest management practices. So he's also responsible for bringing Arbor Day to the state of Texas as well, too. I've talked a little bit about forest management objectives, and again, this is going to vary and depend on who the landowner is. It can be timber production, so most folks in kind of traditional East Texas forest management, they're doing, and if you have a timber exemption or timber tax evaluation on your property, your primary goal has to be timber production. This can be done in a pine plantation setting, kind of the examples of practices that can be done here: site preparation, planting, thinning, chemical application, and prescribed burning. But most folks manage or own property for many different reasons other than just growing trees. Could be recreation, aesthetics. A lot of the time it's for hunting opportunities, or having a getaway place with the family to take the grandkids or kids to. This is a brief list of management activities that can be done on your forest. Things like timber harvesting, replanting, or regeneration practices. We talked about natural versus artificial regeneration. Forest fertilization, this occurs in more commercial settings. Then you have timber thinnings and pre-commercial thinnings. Timber thinnings is what happens when, you're around age 16, 17 in a plantation setting. You can come in and remove some of these trees and get a little bit of return on your investment, as opposed to a pre-commercial thinning where I talked about where you have too many trees, you're overstocked. This is when you come in, you're paying somebody to remove those trees for you. They don't have any commercial value. And then some BMP practices and things that can be done on the property as well to improve it. Site preparation. This is probably the most critical phase of effective and sustainable forest management. We talked about if I were to just clear cut a property or harvest some trees, and if I did nothing else, we talked about what would come back, right? We'd see yopon, we'd see sweet gum, we'd see Chinese salad. So site prep is where we come into play here, where we want to give these seedlings, whether it be artificial or natural, we want to give them the best shot of survival. Several things that we can do here. You see a V blade on a dozer. This is here to kind of remove any residual debris from any other previous harvestings, so that we can increase planting space for more trees to grow on the site. But other things that can be done after this, you can come in and do some herbicide spraying. You could do some site prep burning to burn more of that residual debris off, or heavy mechanical operations as well. I talked about natural regeneration. Again, careful planning is required on this because your spacing and your densities will vary across site. And then talked about the differences between that and artificial regeneration as well. Tree planting. So this can be done by hand. You may have seen some TV shows or things like that where tree planters go out by hand and plant thousands of seeds. They're paid like 35 cents a seedling. So you can imagine how many trees they need to plant a day to kind of make it worth their while. But probably some of the hardest working individuals you will ever meet in your life is tree planters. This is going to be machine planting. If you can't see him, there's a guy sitting right here on the back of this implement. And he's got a box of seedlings right there. And then on his disc, he's got a spacing density marked so that every 3-4 feet, he puts a seedling in the ground. And that's what those are right there. And that's going to be a machine planting process. That's on the back of a tractor, kind of if you're going from pasture land to forest land. You would do this when you don't have to worry about stumps. Obviously, if he hits a stump, he's probably going to go flying out of that. When there are stumps, you have it more of an enclosed cab implement, and it's put on the back of a bulldozer and it gets pulled along the site pretty well. Whatever your thoughts are on herbicide and chemical herbicide applications, it is effective at doing its job when used correctly and according to the label. It can be good and effective at controlling a lot of these unwanted species that we don't want, whether they be invasive or other native species that outcompete some of the desirable species that we want. Used in conjunction with a prescribed burn or a mechanical mulching operation, you'll see we do a lot of mulching on the Jones Forest. Following that up with some sort of herbicide application can give you like optimal long-term control for those unwanted species. I kind of mentioned thinning a little bit, but you'll see this isn't something that only happens in when I say pine plantations, these are, do we know what pine plantation, it's like trees planted in nice, neat rows, right? You'll see it at the Jones today if you go there, but if you've driven past the Jones, it's that area where all the photographers are at, taking pictures all the time. It's right there next to our office. There's a 5-acre pine plantation. There's nice, neat rows. It looks like you're growing crops, you know, on farmland. The advantage to this is that you can come in and do things, and you'll see, so this is our pine plantation here. You can come in here and take the entire row out. You start doing this because trees are always competing with one another, right? Because it's in a forest ecosystem and things are always competing with one another. So as they start competing with one another and those crowns of the trees start touching, that's probably a good sign that you need to come in and do some sort of thinning. So what this does, this gives more sunlight to the trees that are left. You get more water availability in the soil and more nutrient availability for those trees that are left there. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe this is a dumb question, but why would you plant those trees in the first place if you know you're gonna take out the whole row?
So you do get a little bit of money for these. You do get return on your investment for these. Mhm. And it's important to plant enough so that long term that you have, you know, I talked about going from 800 initially down to 350, 400. So that you can maintain that. This says it can be, it's obviously best applied in plantations. It can be done in kind of natural uneven age stands as well, more of a selective gap thinning kind of process too. Depends on the site. Timber stand improvement. This is the culling or felling of undesirable species. This is a very labor intensive process. This is called hack and squirt. You take a machete or some hatchet, something like that. You chop into the cambium layer of the tree. And then you spray a bottle of, could be Roundup, glyphosate, herbicide, some sort of product like that, and it'll kill the tree.
Oh dear, that's suicide.
Huh.
Suiciding a tree.
Suiciding a tree.
I thought glyphosate worked by being through the leaves.
It does, can be uptaken through some of this cambium layer things as well.
What would you do then?
It is much more foliar activated.
What would you do then?
This is done on the Chinese tallow, the sweet gum, the things that you don't want. Obviously, you can imagine that's a very labor intensive and heavy process to be doing that across a lot of acres.
Yeah.
You'll see like heavy duty grade weed whackers, like with the steel blades on them. I would take that to the Yopon and then spray the stumps with some sort of glyphosate to keep it down. Or triclopyr if you can get a hold of triclopyr.
Glyphosate, what is that?
Roundup, the active ingredient in Roundup. Prescribed burning, again, if you go out to the forest today, you'll see what this looks like. We did some burning. We burned 30 acres on Thursday on the forest. This obviously lowers the risk of, to preface this, for all the good that the Smokey Bear campaign has done for this country, we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot on promoting prescribed burning and the effectiveness of prescribed burning as well. Because how can you say, you know, be careful with fire when you see the same people out lighting the woods on fire? East Texas and most of Texas is a fire-dependent ecosystem, meaning that it requires fire to sustainably thrive and maintain. Before human encroachment, before urban development, wildfires would start naturally, you know, lightning storms, things like that, and they would burn across the country for hundreds, thousands of acres, right, and naturally put themselves out. what happens when we stop, when we're full suppression and say, any wildfire that causes it happens, we're gonna put it out immediately. And we're not gonna burn the landscape. That's when you see things like Yopon growing up and making these dense thickets of Yopon understory. That was naturally maintained through fire to keep that down, allowing more sunlight to the forest floor, allowing more pine trees to grow. So East Texas and the pine trees are very much suited to fire, and they do well in this. The bark of a pine tree helps insulate the tree from the damaging, harmful effects of a fire. Again, prescribed burning is a very low intensity fire when it's done correctly. It's very weather dependent. You have to have certain wind speeds, you have to have certain relative humidities, you have to have certain mixing heights. Particularly, you can imagine burning in the Jones State Forest in the middle of Montgomery County. I-45 is 1 mile east of the forest, 1488 runs through the center of the forest, 242 is on our southern boundary. So a lot of what goes into prescribed burning is not only just the burning portions, but the smoke management. You can imagine if I was dumping smoke onto the I-45, that probably wouldn't make a good day and I would probably lose my job pretty quickly. So prescribed burning is very, very weather dependent and very weather specific and it has to be done correctly.
So out of your 30 acres, how much were you actually burning at a time?
Good question. So we divide that 30 acres up, and 30 acres, when you look at the big picture of prescribed burning in East Side, 30 acres is a very small portion. But again, it's the Jones State Forest in the middle of Montgomery County. Burning any acre at all is impressive. But within that 30 acres, we were cutting it down to, we had a 5 acre, then we had some 10 acre blocks. So they were very small blocks. And once we finished one block, give it some time, give it a little bit of rest, and then we jump up to the next block.
And so put that fire out when it's done what you want it to do, or does it just burn out?
So we have fire breaks, fire control lines around the perimeter of the burn compartment. You'll see most of our trail systems on the forest can be classified as fire breaks, fire control lines. After that, we have numerous fire departments on scene that help use water and suppression. And then we also use some bulldozers on some of the heavier portions. You'll still see some smoke out there today if you go out there. If it's well interior and there's nothing for it to burn around it, then it's not going to go anywhere, right? Because there's nothing else.
How long does it actually burn typically when you're burning off the small stuff?
Very quickly, like the 5 acre plantation we burned, I mean, it goes quick. 5 acres, I mean, we were burning, we had flames on the ground maybe for 20 minutes.
Okay.
And we were in and out of there.
Yeah.
The worst part is the mop up, is, cleaning everything up and making sure that it's good. Of all the forest management activities and practices that we talk about, prescribed burning is the most cost effective and cheapest. You can imagine with other mechanical operations, you have to pay the guy to drive it, you have to pay the machine, you have to put diesel in that machine. It's very, very cost heavy.
If it gets a hold of some poison ivy, the people that are standing next to it, are they affected?
There's been some studies on smoke inhalation, things like that. We've been doing it for a very long time. We've been prescribed burning. I haven't personally had any effects from poison ivy smoke inhalation.
West Coast, where it's poison oak instead of poison ivy, my parents were burning my eyes when I was little, with my eyes swelled shut, and
Yeah, you may want to wear your goggles.
Jackie and they thought I was gonna lose my sight. So it can be very devastating if you're not careful. Keep your kids out of it.
Mature stand activities. This is what a kind of total harvest clear cut looks like. If this is the operation that we're doing, which method of regeneration are we relying on? Natural or artificial? Artificial, and why?
You don't have mother trees in the middle.
Exactly, right? We're gonna get some natural seed in from these trees on the edge. Is it gonna be enough to have a good density on the forest? No, absolutely not. We'll have some natural seed in from the sides, obviously, but yes, we're gonna be requiring on or dependent upon artificial regeneration to come back and replant this forest after we do some sort of operation like this. I talked about seed tree a little bit, but again, this is a process where you're identifying these seed trees, these mother trees, parent trees. You're gonna leave about 4 to 10 of those per acre, and those are gonna be responsible for your next cohort of trees that come back. Shelter wood is a very similar concept to seed tree, you're just leaving a lot more trees per acre.
What's the difference? Like, why would you prefer one over the other?
This is obviously pretty devastating, I mean, this can look like a bomb went off in the woods. And even this can still somewhat look like, and so if the landowner is more, wants to have a more aesthetically pleasing harvest done, leaving more trees on the landscape can help reach that objective.
Do you think that shelter wood and seed woods, would be equally affected by a hurricane? In other words, blowing down the trees that you left?
Yes,
That's what I was thinking.
depending on the path and the wind speeds and everything, but yes, I
Yeah.
think, yeah. Best management practices, these, they'll typically find these across the country. Some are voluntary, some are mandatory. In Texas, best management practices are voluntary. And these are designed to enhance and protect water quality. And in particular, they address non-point source pollution issues. So we talk about things like streamside management zone. When a creek or stream runs through the property, we have guidelines or recommendations on things that should be done to help promote and preserve that water quality. You don't want to be harvesting right up to the edge of the creek, right? You can get sedimentation issues and all sorts of devastating issues from that. As well as forest roads. Forest roads can be a huge and contributor to sedimentation of streams and creeks. And there's certain design practices and techniques when building forest roads that should be accommodated doing so. This is an example of a streamside management zone here. You'll see that this tract was harvested and it looks like it's been replanted recently. But this is our stream that ran through the property and we didn't harvest it. You can do some harvesting in here. You probably want to leave around 50 square feet basal area minimum. But we left the stream intact here. We didn't do much harvesting. So our general recommendation minimum here is that you leave a 50-foot buffer from the edge of the creek out and you don't do any harvesting. If you do any harvesting, very minimal selective harvesting. This is going to depend on the slope and steepness of the terrain next to it. If you have a much steeper slope, then you need to go out to 100, 150 feet. This doesn't start at the center of the stream, right? This doesn't start, because 50 feet buffer in the middle of Central River, you're still going to be in the river. This starts at the edge.
Quick question, just thinking, how do you define a stream for these purposes? I mean, if it's empty, half the time of the year or 3/4 of the year, would it still qualify or?
I would say so. Anything that can, so you have like perennial, intermittent and ephemeral streams and creeks, things like that. It depends on the amount, like major ones, I would definitely implement this and it depends on the landowner and things like that. And some are just dry creek beds majority of the year. If it can hold water, if it's capable of holding water and contributing to the watershed, then yes, I would say that these are great practices to implement.
Okay, these guidelines are for intermittent and perennial streams, which perennial, they flow 90% of the year. On a normal year, sometimes we have abnormal years where even they should almost dry up. And then intermittents are 30 to 90% of the year. And then ephemerals are only hold water after like a major, like a big rain event. Doesn't have to be a major, but a big rain event. The ephemerals, the guideline, you don't have to put a 50-foot buffer on, but we still like maybe a smaller little stringer of trees around it, but the guidelines are just for the intermittent and the
Some of the examples and things that we do on roads in particular is water bars. And these are kind of, if you've been down kind of a backcountry road or something, you may see like, this is honestly a speed bump in a dirt road. And it's angled in a way that used in conjunction with a wing ditch. This diverts water off the road and kind of into the stand. So when you have this, and you're trying to reduce the speed and the volume of the velocity and the volume of water coming down that road. So then if you have this water bar at an angle, And then you can angle it and divert it down the wing ditch. And then the wing ditch, as it goes into the forest stand, makes kind of a J hook and shoots it back up, away from any sorts of streams, creeks, SMZs, things like that. Because you're trying to, again, avoid sedimentation of those water bodies. Any questions? We're getting to forest health.
Yeah, we have a question on the chat.
Yes, ma'am.
About burning and Japanese climbing ferns.
Burning and Japanese climbing ferns, as they, it can be, yes, what you have to, there's this, when you talk about burning or forest management,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
things like ladder fuels. So ladder fuels, Japanese climbing fern could be considered a ladder fuel if grown enough of it. Ladder fuels connect the understory, the bottom of the forest floor to the top of the forest canopy, right? So things like green briars, vines, there's also, yopon that can kind of act as a ladder fuel to connect those two different layers. It's important to manage those, so that they don't work as that they don't provide that opportunity for fire to go from understory to mid-story to forest canopy. But yes, it can help it be effective at controlling Japanese climbing fern. This is a brief list of all the forest health issues currently in Texas. This obviously doesn't summarize everything, but these are some of the big ones. We talked a little bit about oak wilt already. This is very much a real and prevalent threat to central hill country Texas landowners. Hypoxylon canker, pine bark beetle, we talked about heavy on. Emerald ash borer is this pretty green looking thing here. Nice metallic green to them, but definitely one of the biggest invasives currently threatening the country.
Describe that canker a little bit more. What kind of trees is it?
Your oaks, you typically see these on I see them a lot on water oaks. You'll see like a bald spot or kind of a dark bald spot with the bark falling off on a water oak in particular.
And it gets slipped.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and it'll cause.
Any recommendations for trees that have that taken down?
Take them down. Talk a little bit about the bark beetles already. Obviously, we talked about the southern pine beetle. Then we have the black turpentine beetle and the Ips beetle. There's several different species in the Ips bark beetle group. But this is going to be your biggest threat to commercial forests in East Texas in particular. Donna, could you give us some background on Dr. Billings' picture here?
Okay, the southern pine beetle, you mentioned Dr. Billings, in fact, he's the man who hired me, I started off working with him. But he was a big into bark beetles and that world expert, he still gives, consulting to, other like Central and South America, that sort of thing. But that's the photo of the beetle, the southern pine beetle. It's the most destructive forest pest that we have in East Texas. It is not that big. It is about the size of a grain of rice, or even half of a large grain of rice, that size. It kills a tree by attacking, gets to the bark of the tree, and they attack live trees. And they drill through the bark and get into the sap layer of the tree. And the tree tries to defend itself. See the picture at the bottom was that little popcorns on the side of the tree. It tries to defend itself by pushing the beetles out through that sap. And sometimes you'll see some of them stuck in that sap. But when you have like 3,000, 4,000 beetles attacking the tree, it can't defend itself amongst all of them. So it succumbs to it. And they get into inside the bark there. And if you peel off bark, you can see these little galleries, we call them. And so southern pine beetle, they're kind of like spaghetti looking galleries. The little tiny places on the end. The female goes in there, drills through there, goes through the and chews out the galleries, and then she lays her eggs in there, and those are little egg niches, little tiny little offshoots of those main highways, and that's her eggs hatch. And then the larvae, when they are ready to emerge as an adult, they have a larval stage and a pupal stage that's inside that inner bark right there. And then when they emerge, they have little tiny holes where they come out and emerge as adults like this.
And their strategy is to, okay, I attack this tree, it gives off, smells like, hey, there's enough beetles in here, go somewhere else. So those pheromones or those smells send them to the next tree, the next tree. So that large picture right there in the middle is, maybe this being national forest, I forget all where they are now, but it starts off with, when they kill the tree or two, but the leaves will turn, the needles will turn green, will be green, and then eventually they turn red and yellow and red and then brown and fall off. In the center of that picture, it's hard to tell, but the trees have been dead long enough where most of the needles are real, or dry or have fallen off. The red and then the orange comes out. You see the yellow, that's the newerly dead trees, and there's probably even green trees up above that are actually dead, but they're not showing it yet because they're recently dead. The reason it gets that devastating is because there's so many beetles, and if they have the pheromones that say, hey, there's no vacancy here, go attack another tree, it just spreads from tree to tree to tree like dominoes. And this got so bad because it's in a wilderness area of the national forest. In the wilderness areas, you can't take mechanical things in there. You can't do much management at all. Just let nature take its course. Well, nature did. And so in one of the national forests, 8,000 out of 12,000 acres were killed. Another one, 7,000 out of 9,000 acres of the wilderness area were taken over because they couldn't get in there and do anything. And so that leaves, big holes in there. Eventually those trees are gonna fall down. It's a tinderbox of fire. For fire, if there's a fire there, it can be devastating to the whole area and the neighboring private landowners. So that's that's why it gets so bad. But in normal circumstances, we cut down the trees. We were doing research with putting up artificial baits to keep the bugs away, but the main thing is cut enough of the infested trees and a big buffer zone in front of the infested trees to stop that domino effect. And that's how we take care of them under normal circumstances.
Any natural predators?
Yeah, there's a beetle out there called the checkered beetle, or claret is the genus name. The genus name, and there are predators for them. And then, of course, there are larvae. Woodpeckers love it. It's a buffet. Well, there's a tree there. So yeah, there are some natural predators, but their main predators that we look when we trap and see what the populations are like. We look for those checkered beetles, those clarets, to make sure there's enough predators out there to help take care of them.
You research on pheromones and how to use those to.
Yeah. In fact, that's what I started off doing. And one pheromone, when the beetles start attacking the tree, they give off one pheromone that is an attractant to bring them in, other beetles in to help them kill the tree, because 3 or 4 or 5 aren't going to do it. It attracts them to come in. And then after it gets full enough, there's another pheromone they give off to keep the beetles out. And our research was on that frontalin, that pheromone that keeps beetles out. And like in somebody's yard, it's not practical to do in a large forested area, but somebody's yard or something, beetles nearby, putting those things on individual trees or a small buffer of trees helps with that. So that's what we're doing, put these little packets of that pheromone on trees in front of a small beetle spot, and we were going back checking and see what the results were.
It's also interesting you mentioned these are kind of natural tinderboxes. So in a natural succession, these beetles can create a tinderbox. Fire would come through and it would just all start,
Start from it, and it's gonna come back a different.
come back.
Yeah,
and,
Yep.
It's kind of
different
natural
species, stuff like that,
system
but yeah,
as well.
it's gonna come, it comes back, yep.
So there's no, biocontrol disease that's specific enough for that beetle to use?
Not really, not that I've ever seen or heard
Let
of.
Bill Gates on this. Instead of killing humans, he can kill the pigeons.
Your description of the southern pine beetle, how close is that to the black turpentine and they're all in the same family group. The black turpentine beetles will kill trees, but I rarely see it. I've seen it only a couple times, and they attack the tree down lower. And the other beetles that he showed on the chart up there, the avulsus or the ips. There's 3 species of those. They all attack different parts of the tree. The smaller ones attack up in the crown, in the middle, and down below. They will kill trees, and they will go from tree to tree a little bit, but not near as much as the southern pine beetle. So lately, we haven't caught any southern pine beetles
period, in several years. I think Mississippi and Alabama now are still having trouble with them, but they're bound to come back, they're cyclic. And the Ips beetles now, if you see them and it's bark beetles, it's usually them that are killing it. Yeah, drought stress trees, yes, or any other stressors attract those invader beetles and they come in and attack. No.
What's the time frame of this thing? That's been over several months, so.
I think that's probably a year.
Yeah.
So the pictures I've seen before, like one summer, we have a picture, one of them, I was there when it was like pollen infestation, like a little bit bigger than this room, and then it got to like that. So it took a year from one summer to the next summer. I believe all those pictures were taken in a year.
Things that we do, Donna mentioned traps. We do deploy traps across East Texas every year to detect this. We also use aerial detection as well. So days of old, this is done in airplanes. More often than not now, we go to more satellite imagery stuff and kind of detect it. You can obviously you can pick this up pretty quickly, hopefully, from satellite imagery. Emerald ash borer. Talk about this one a little bit here. Invasive from Eastern Asia. I believe it came over on the shipping channel on the East Coast and has since been making its way westward. Targets and kills ash trees. Again, green, kind of metallic shade, about the size of a penny, I think. This is what one of the traps look like. Again, we do trap for this species every year. But this is just a trap for detection. Okay, this isn't a eradication trap.
Just pretty much strictly bore on ash. The other trees.
Yeah, for the most part, just ash. Mhm.
And ash and ash juniper are two different things. Is that right?
Yes. You'll see here, Toledo, Ohio, picture on the left from 2006, and then picture on the right to 2009. Kind of a neighborhood street line with ash trees, all gone from the dashboard.
What did the HOA do?
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any studies of trees that are defending against these predators, like kind of a natural defense against, and then that genetic reproduces over time?
I'm not familiar. I assume it is happening, and we're obviously that takes a long time, and we're in the early stages of that kind of evolutionary trait happening, right? This map is probably out of date. There's been a lot more counties that have had EAV outbreaks since this time, but as far as Texas goes, we first kind of picked it up there in Northeast Texas and that Cass, Marion, Harrison counties. And then in 2018, Tarrant County popped up. This is Fort Worth, Dallas-Fort Worth kind of area. So you would assume that if it's in Tarrant County, it's probably in those counties in between, but what are some thoughts on how this guy traveled from Northeast Texas into the DFW kind of?
Plant.
Firewood, right? So if you heard the phrase like burn it where you buy it, don't transport firewood, things of that nature. There's also that nice I-20 corridor that heads in that same direction there. So assumptions can be made, right? Assumptions can be made on how this guy traveled, but yes, you'll often hear this talk of, don't travel with firewood, burn it where you buy it, things like that. It's very much a real thing that does contribute to these invasive spreading.
Should have that on every campsite.
Yeah. Wildfires in Texas, we obviously, this is a very hot topic right now, just got out of a big wildfire.
You think that was natural or was it man-made? Like,
The Panhandle,
yeah.
it was power line was the investigative cause of it. No comment. Texas witnessed the most destructive wildfire season in state history during the 2011 fire season. 2011.
That year.
Sorry?
That was a hot summer.
Yes.
That's when we lost the park. So many trees down in the park.
Yeah, the most historic catastrophic wildfire season that Texas has seen in recent history here. Over 3.5 million acres burned, 30,000 homes destroyed. These a very iconic picture here from the Bastrop Complex fire coming into Bastrop here. And then this is images of the Bastrop State Park.
So the one that happened in Panhandle is bigger than this, right?
The Panhandle wildfire, yeah, Smokehouse Creek is over 1 million acres, the largest wildfire in Texas history. This here is a complex, so you're managing multiple wildfires underneath one incident. But yes, the one in the Panhandle burned into Oklahoma.
They don't want us to eat beef.
Sorry.
They don't want us to eat beef. They want us to eat.
I don't know. I believe, I want to say like 92%, 96% of Bastrop State Park burned during the Bastrop complex. Very significant portion. If you've driven through this area recently, you'll still see dead standing timber and the younger regeneration that's been naturally, and then some that has been planted back to kind of recover from this. This north of Huntsville too, from Tri-County fires that we had in 2013 in this area too. Kind of dead standing charred timber still out there, as well as the younger regeneration that's coming back.
So if the dead trees stand alive, are standing, would those beetles go to them?
No, they're typically targeting live trees. What those dead standing timber can be useful for is habitat for other birds, mammals, things like that. They're almost wrapped up here. I'm not looking for a specific answer to these questions, just something to keep in mind. Keeping in mind everything that we talked about today. What are the challenges to not only East Texas piney woods, but all of our forest ecoregions in Texas, and what are some of the things that we could do to kind of help mitigate some of these impacts of these forests? In regards to population growth and urbanization, are the communities prepared to deal with the effect that population will have on the forest resource? We talked about the loss of forest acreage here in Southeast Texas in particular, and the overall value and impact of the forest products sector. As we continue to urbanize and expand and population growth into these forested areas, is there enough resource? Is there enough timber to sustain that growth? Central Texas woodlands, obviously a very important part of Texas, being threatened by land fragmentation, wildfire, oak wilt in particular. What partnerships can be made, both governmentally, non-governmentally, and private landowner-wise? What kind of partnerships can be fostered together to help protect this ecoregion? Talked about the rapid urbanization of East Texas and the impact that could have. Water quality and quantity. There's always the threat of, somebody else stealing our water and things like that. Water is very much a very valuable resource as we move forward into the future. There will always be more people and the same amount of land and the same amount of water available for this increasing population. So we should keep in mind the value and impact that forests can have on preserving and cleaning our water and preserving our water quality. Wildfire and public safety. We've seen what statewide threat that this can cause. What can we do with our forest resources and our communities to help reduce and minimize these impacts? And then urban forest sustainability. Urban forests and urban tree canopies are very valuable. When you talk things like heat island effects, there's so much concrete, so much asphalt within these cities, they generate a lot of heat. The urban forest canopy helps kind of mitigate some of this and kind of shade. You have trees in your yard that provides shade on your home. You can see the impacts of that every day, whether it be your electric bill or just enjoying your backyard property. You can kind of see the benefits that trees have for you. All right, here's my shameless plug. If you're familiar, Tuesday mornings on the Jones State Forest is kind of the Heartwood Volunteer Day. Folks typically out in the gardens helping maintain our native pollinator gardens out there. Terry Fitch is very much heavily involved, as well as some other weekly locals there that help come out. If you're interested in conservation education, we host numerous field trips on the forest. We're always looking for volunteers to help us assist with school field trips, teaching this kind of subject matter to the kids. Jaden Kelly, a proud member of Heartwood, is our conservation education coordinator on the forest. This is his email address and phone number. If you're interested in getting involved, feel free to reach out to him. And I believe that their hours are already coded for your volunteer opportunities on the Jones if you're looking for more hours. Well, it's 9:58, but I'll take a couple questions. If not, I'll be here throughout Donna's presentation, and then I will absolutely be out there on the forest for those going to the forest after this. But that's my email address. I have the same phone number as Jaden, so feel free to reach out with any questions or comments that you may have.
All right, so, class reminders, make sure that you sign in. Our sign-in sheet is on the back table. And make sure you sign in for every class, or if you attend by Zoom, make sure you have your real name as your username, or you get into the chat and write your name. Or if you're a couple, then put both names. I know we have a few couples in here that just log in under one name. Make sure you add your hours to VMS. You have 45 days from the time that you clock either volunteer hours, initial training hours, or AT hours. So make sure you do it before the 45 days is up. We have some people who have not all of their hours clocked in. We have some people who somehow have over their hours clocked in. So just do it as the class happens. Just to make sure that's all correct. Also, so today we're going to do the forest with Donna, and she'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. I wanted to talk about a couple other opportunities coming up through our training class. The next class is at the Woodlands Emergency Center with Terry MacArthur, who's an amazing public servant for the Woodlands Township and is also just really active in the community. We have an opportunity to do a litter pickup with her after the class. We advise, if you're going to stay around for that, to bring your lunch, and so we can all kind of have a lunch together and then go out and do the litter pickup. For that, you do get volunteer hours, so just plan to stay late if you want to do that. I think it's about 2 hours is what she said, and we'll pick up litter, and then we get to go through it and sort it out, what's recyclable, what's not, and just have a great conversation about that with Terry. And then on the 20th at Mercer, we have an opportunity to do a tour of the Mercer Botanical Center, which is their herbarium, the native plant conservation nursery, the botanical library, and the botanical illustration collection. So if you're interested in that, we're going to have to do it in 2 groups of 20. Well, we'll do it in groups of maximum 20. So we will be shifting people through there. Again, bring your lunch because it might be kind of a longer day than we're expecting. Anita will probably talk until noon. From 8 to noon is her class time. So yeah, bring a lunch. You can hang out at the park or in the visitor classroom and have lunch until we do that tour, which is just 2 blocks away. So we will drive over there. That will be on the 20th. At Mercer Botanic Gardens. We have our class there that day. Anita Tiller is the botanist there. It's an amazing class. I'm biased. But yeah, then afterwards we'll go over to the Botanical Center for that tour. If you're interested, that will also count. I think that counts as AT. I'm not sure. We'll figure out what that counts for and let you know.
I think volunteer hours.
Volunteer hours. Well, hopefully it'll be volunteer hours. We'll let you know soon. And I want to introduce,
Does that start at 8 or 8:30?
8:30, you're right, it's 8:30 to 12:30. And we do expect the class to go for the whole time. Okay, so I want to introduce Lisa Houston, our new president for the Heartwood chapter. Yes, Sharon just moved, so we have a new president. She's great. And she's going to talk to you a little bit about some of our upcoming opportunities.
Yeah, so really, I just wanted to plug the chapter meeting, which is going to be in this room on Wednesday. It is Volunteer Appreciation Month, and we're not going to do a big whiz bang and probably till the end of the year. We'll have time to do something fun near to December, but we are going to do some special things. So just a little teaser. If you come, we're going to have some of our partners coming in and talking about the volunteer opportunities that are available. So it'd be a good time to find out some things. But also reach out to other people within the group. Some people are doing things already, I know. So just find out what other people are doing based on what you're interested in. So please come to the chapter meeting, 6 o'clock for socializing. We'll have some, the board's going to provide some treats for that night. So it's not going to be a full dinner, but have a little bit to eat, some snacks and some sweets. And I'm going to go a little wild on the giveaways. So everybody come. All right.
When is it? One more time.
It's going to be Wednesday, the social hour in this room. 6 o'clock for social hour, and then the meeting will begin at 6:30. We'll have a little bit of business, and then we'll do a panel discussion with our partners.
Okay, so the 10th.
Yes, the
Yeah,
tenth.
the 10th.
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Get something else, so I can look it up. Yes, all
The
right.
10th,
Thank
okay,
you.
cool,
All right, Donna,
thank
all yours.
you.
So the 13th and the 20th bring lunch.
Great. Well, I am Donna Work. I've been with Texas A&M Forest Service for 33 years now. And my degree is in wildlife biology from A&M. I started off working in forest insect pest research, and then I also had a big interest in water. So when our best management practices that were up there, now we call ourselves water resources to kind of expand a little bit, started up, I joined that group. So I was working for that and the forest pest. And then when our guy who was monitoring the red cockaded woodpeckers on 2 of our state forests, when he retired, then they asked me to do it because I had the wildlife degree. I said, all right, it's real wildlife instead of 6-legged wildlife. So I did that. So for a while I was working with three programs. And then after the one grant I was on with the pest management, then I didn't do that anymore, although I still do a little bit of work once in a while, or involved a little bit, not much. And still did the water resources, and I still do that as well. And stewardship, which combines in with the red cockaded woodpecker management work, and then now work with Forest Legacy Program, which is conservation easements. So we're here to talk about red cockaded woodpecker. And let me see if I can make this make a sound. Or not. Well, there it goes. Very cool. So that's then we can hear them pecking and communicating that way all together. As you can see, it is a small woodpecker, about the size of a bluebird or cardinal. And I put this up here. Let's make that guy upright. Okay, so I put this up here just to compare to some of the other common woodpeckers that you could easily mistaken for red cockaded woodpecker. Red cockaded woodpecker is on the left-hand side. You can see the solid white cheek patch. This is a great picture because you can't, in the field, you can't always see the red on the red cockaded woodpecker. But this one, he's either agitated or he fluffed up his feathers somehow. And right back there, in an area where you think, oh, like an ear would be, the cockade area of the bird is a patch of red. And it's on the male and the male only. And again, it's real hard to see in the field when somebody says, when I tell them I work with the red cockaded woodpecker, they say, oh yeah, I see those come to my grandma's feeder. Or yeah, I see those all the time. That big red, it's so pretty. Well, that's not the red cockaded woodpecker. They say they saw the red. This real, with binoculars or spotting scope, you can kind of see it, but still the light conditions have to be just right. They either have to be agitated or scratching like this and turn just right to see that red. But another one that looks very similar to them is the hairy woodpecker. It does have a patch of red back in that area, but it's almost always visible. It's not usually hidden. It is larger than the red cockaded woodpecker, and the downy woodpecker itself is smaller than the red cockaded woodpecker. So the downy and hairy are marked pretty much the same. They both have the black stripe across the white cheek patch. That's the first clue that you can look for, because the red cockaded woodpecker has a solid white cheek patch, and we'll see it better here in a minute. And that little circling there that I did with the back here, you can see the black spot on the white straight feathers on the tail feathers there. This is a good way to see the woodpecker's tail feathers, and their tail feathers are different than other birds. They're pretty stiff, and you can see they're kind of pointed on the end. Why would they be stiff as they are?
To support the bell.
Very good, to support them, because they're like this, and those tail feathers help to support them on a tree like that. You can't quite see it you can kind of see it on the downy woodpecker. Their feet are also different than other woodpeckers. Can you see a difference in them? Well, no, the woodpecker feet are different than other birds. So most of a bird, like if you have a turkey, you have some toes out here and a toe here. The woodpecker toes are 2 up and 2 back. Another strategy for staying on the trees up either like this or whatever. So they're built for that. And here you can see the red cockaded woodpecker. It has the black it's almost striped, it's little dots actually, but it's almost striping. It's one of the ladderback woodpeckers, but it's not, there is a species called ladderback too. But they have, it's got the ladderback pattern, in other words, but still the red cockaded woodpecker. And you can see the solid white cheek patch right there on the bird. So that's the big distinguishing thing when you're looking at other woodpeckers. And then other species besides the downy and the hairy are so totally different, it's hard to mix them up, like the red-headed woodpecker and the little tuxedo looking soft black and white and pileated so big and things like that. So that's the main distinguishing feature of that. And there you can see his toes front and back there as well. So this is just a picture of showing the male and female. The male is the only one that has the red back there, and the female has none. She looks just like him. So it's really hard to tell, again, unless those feathers are fluffed up and you can actually see them. This is a juvenile male, which a juvenile that was hatched the year this photo was taken, but with his first set of feathers come in, it's going to have a red spot on top of their head. Then after they molt, about September, October actually, and gets new feathers in, then the red is no longer on top of the head, but it is in the cockade area like the adults. I put this up here. Sometimes I talk to Audubon groups, and does anybody, I gave it away. Does anybody recognize the artist to this? And y'all know anyways, I can't usually hide that from anybody. But he actually painted some red cockaded woodpeckers. And so the next facts I'm going to show you, I'm not dissing him, but I think it's just kind of funny a little bit. So this is in his journal or whatever, this is his story about how he got the red cockaded woodpeckers. It says this species, which is first described by Wilson, is found abundantly, we don't have that anymore, from Texas to New Jersey. They don't go up that high anymore. And inland as far as Tennessee. And they're not there anymore either. Near Bayou Sarah in Louisiana, I once slightly wounded 2 males, which I put into my hat in order to carry them home. You know, I would be in jail now if I did that. The first
world did he slightly wound them?
I know. And what does that mean? It says, we'll find out here a little bit about that. The first, on being brought to the ground, so how to get to the ground, was easily secured, but the case was different with the other, for it at once hopped off towards the nearest tree, crying loudly all the while, and on reaching it, ascended as if unhurt. However, I obtained it accidentally, knocking off the bark with a clod of earth. It defended itself courageously and pecked at my fingers. Yeah, I've had that happen. With so much vigor that I was obliged to let it drop several times out of my hand. So and this is true. There's a site there that you can go to and read that. So I just thought that was kind of funny for nowadays and our laws and stuff like that. But that's how and a lot of people tell me, well, how do you think you got those such good paintings of the other birds? You got to have them in hand and they're not always alike. So not to burst other bubbles, but I just thought it was interesting. So this is their historic range all across, like East Texas is the easternmost part of their range. And then they go up and then southeastern Oklahoma, southern Arkansas, and all across the south there. But in the old days, there were some here in Missouri, and there's some up in Kentucky and Tennessee, and as it said in there, all the way up into New Jersey, and it doesn't go that far anymore. I believe it's 11 states now that they occur in. And with this map, it needs to be updated because they're no longer in Kentucky. And that is because they had bark beetles that came in and killed all the habitat in that southern part of Kentucky where the birds were. But fortunately, they were able to capture those and take them down somewhere into the south and release them down there. So now it's just they're not fully inside those polygons here. So it's just little select spaces inside here where they do occur. Like that's not solid red cockaded woodpeckers, but on our 4 national forests and 2 of our state forests and a few private lands is where they are there. This in Texas is the historic range for all of East Texas, even all the way up to the northeasternmost counties and all the way down Chambers and Orange County and down there. But now this also needs to be updated. And it is, these are the current counties where they're in. The solid colors are where the higher populations are, and that's where our national forests are: Sabine, Houston, Sam Houston, Angelina, and Davy Crockett National Forest. They are no longer, as far as we know, in Polk County. There used to be some on the Indian reservation, and they had a very, very small population. And from what I understand, they have none there now. In Hardin County, they're not there anymore. But they're still in these other counties, yeah, because that's because of the national forest there. Cherokee County is where one of our state forests is, with a population that's hanging on there. And of course, in Montgomery County, we have them here and on some private lands. I'm trying to think, Tyler, I don't think Tyler has any. Oop. So this is the habitat that they were used to being in. This is what they were adapted for. Large, usually longleaf pine. Nice open stands without, not real brushy under here, the kind that they say, the old pioneers would say you could run a horse through it and not get knocked off. So these kind of pine stands that we don't see much anymore. So that's what they were adapted for, the longleaf pine. But back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the pioneers coming across from the east, coming across the west, they were harvesting the trees. They were using it, not maliciously, they were using the trees to build their cabins, their fences, to make room for their gardens and all sorts of things like that. And that's before they understood that, wow, there's limited resource here. It's a natural, a renewable resource, but it is limited. So if we don't start now planting back, and that's in the 1930s when they started realizing that and planting back, and we have the trees that we have nowadays. So like most endangered species, it's loss of habitat for them. They like the large, old, mature trees. And when those were harvested here and replanted back, it took a while to get them to that large, mature stage again. And so nowadays, this is what a nice woodpecker cluster area would be. And I'll explain cluster here in a minute. Nice and open, same thing. We only have like 3 or 4% of the longleaf pine across the South that we used to have. Now the last several years have been initiatives to push replanting with longleaf pine. And so those numbers are growing as far as longleaf pine acres, but there's a lot less there now, but most of them are now going to be in loblolly. And here in East Texas, a lot of it is loblolly. And down in this area, most of the trees they're in are in loblolly. And up in, excuse me, my northern population in Cherokee County is mostly in shortleaf, but some in long. Some in loblolly.
What do we think the difference in the pines?
The longleaf pine is a really good resin, a sap producer, and we'll talk about that more here in a minute. So that keeps them a little safer from predators and things. They're the only woodpecker that builds their cavities they roost in at night, and that they nest in during nesting season in live pine trees. So I'm thinking, because of the abundance of longleaf pine in the past or along the South, plus also the great resin production and the fire tolerance and disease tolerance of the longleaf pine, that was their pine of choice. Shortleaf and lob, they do just fine in them here. That's what we have. So they do just fine here. Other states, they'll be in other species of pine. But around here, they do okay with these. And they make their cavities in live pine trees. Other woodpeckers are going to use dead trees to build their cavities, or trees that have, maybe they're alive, but red cockaded woodpecker built a cavity in there and they can take that over. But most of them are going to use the dead trees. Red cockadeds use the live pine trees. And one of the things that they can somehow detect are these pine trees that have a disease called red heart rot. It's a fungus that gets into the center of the tree, and you know the heartwood of the tree is stout and strong like y'all. But that red heart rot, that fungus, helps to soften that hardwood and make it almost not spongy, but kind of looks spongy and more porous. And a lot of times that is manifested by a conch, this little mushroom on the side of the tree. I don't see that too much, but that's one of the manifestations of, hey, this tree has red heart rot. So if you're pecking your beak against a tree, a live tree, and trying to build a cavity, you want all the help you can get. So the large mature trees, for one thing, they have the room for them to build their cavities in it. And for another thing, they're going to have their possibility of having the red heart rot. And that's what it looks like inside the tree when they have the red heart rot. So making it much easier for them to excavate these cavities that take them a year or 2 or more years to do that. And so this is a start hole. This is you may find other holes in trees that may be a feeding hole for pileated woodpeckers, or a damaged hole, or a knot hole where the limb fell off. But these are round and smooth and kind of conical when they're first starting off. They're about, when they finish it, the entrance hole is about 2 inches wide. And if they're building the start tree where they haven't got to the center yet, it's going to be nice and smooth with their little bitty beaks that are pecking on that and to get inside the tree.
How deep is it?
The start hole can be when they first start off, that's why we call it a start hole, but how deep is it? They'll go to about the center of the tree. So it could be 3, 4, 5, 3 or 4, 5 inches deep into the tree, and it's going to go down about 6 inches when they get inside. This is a tree that they've completed. So that's it looked like that start tree to begin with, but that is the entrance hole and it's all completed. I can tell it's being used by red cockaded woodpeckers right now, because since it's a live tree, every morning they use that liveness to their advantage. They peck little resin wells. So there's a little hole right there where the outside of the bark is kind of grayish. It's kind of reddish in there. When they peck away the bark that's fresh and red still, it hasn't dried out and turned to gray. And the sap is flowing through, and they use that sap to flow down and protect them from their major predator, the rat snake. But this is complete. So this hole is only 2 inches in diameter, and the sap is flowing nice and fresh. But they haven't been using it very long, because the longer they use it, the more sap is flowing down, the more resin wells are up there and that sort of thing.
So it actually destroys the tree, right?
No, it doesn't. They're not girdling the tree. If we took a knife and cut it all the way around, cut like basically the vascular system of the tree, yeah, it would die. But they're just going into the center and even pecking in those resin wells. The sap is going to flow, but it's not cutting off that whole vascular system of the tree. And they go down in the middle. So it doesn't go all the way around the tree and cut off that life system. It does make them more susceptible to wind though. So in high winds and some of the tornadoes and things we've had, they will tend to, even the natural cavities that they build or the artificial ones we put in, the pine trees tend to snap at that point, but it doesn't kill the tree. This is just a close-up of that one. There's been more work on this. They've been there longer. Again, I can see it real well on this, but I don't know if you can see how well, where they've pecked the bark, it's kind of reddish. And that means it's active. That means the woodpecker is currently using, because sometimes we have trees out there that the woodpeckers abandoned or for various reasons. But this means they're using it, and the sap's nice and sticky looking, nice and fresh, and it's building up right there. I'll talk a little more about that later on. That's just a close up that while I was up in the tree, I thought, well, I'll get a picture while I'm up here.
You were on the tree.
Yeah, I was on the tree when I took this one. The others, I think, were zoomed in with the camera, but this one I was on the tree. I remember taking this one. So I was, well, I've never taken pictures from up here before, so I'll do that.
How do you get up on the tree?
Ladders, and I'll have some pictures of those in here in a little bit. This is a completed cavity. This is what they look like inside. So again, going back to the center of the tree and down, 6 or 7 inches and probably about 3 inches wide, a little more than 3 inches wide. So it's one bird per cavity. So when they go to roost, each family member is going to have their own cavity tree, usually in a different tree, but sometimes they'll have 2 cavities in one tree. And so that's where they go in to roost at night. They don't use a bunch of bedding material or anything. They peck away here and there'll be like little wood chips down there, but that's it. They're not bringing in leaves. They're not bringing in feathers. They're not bringing in cotton balls or anything like that. It's just bare bones, roughing it, that sort of thing. So that's a natural cavity that they have built themselves and what it looks like on the inside.
How long is their lifespan?
Probably 7 to 9 years, I think I've heard, and 9 years is probably pretty long. So probably about 7 years.
How many babies do they have? And I guess they stay in obviously they're in the middle of the.
Right. Oftentimes you'll see 3, sometimes 2. I've seen them lay 5 eggs, but not all of them hatch. And I've seen them lay 4 eggs and not all of them hatch. I've seen them lay 4 eggs and all hatch and all fledge, but sometimes that's not the case. But I think they're like the average, 2.6 is the average family size or something like that. But often also 2 and 3 pretty often, if it's a good, healthy family group.
So once they abandon it, somebody else can take over?
Yeah, if it's in good enough shape, sometimes other red cockaded woodpeckers will come in and I'll say reactivate the tree, they'll take it over. But if the red cockaded's abandoned it unless they were killed or something, there may be something else wrong with the tree, maybe it's dying and not producing that sap. Or other woodpeckers have gotten in there and enlarged the cavity hole where it's too big for them to feel comfortable in. So, and if no other red cockaded woodpeckers go in there, so one of the other woodpeckers could use it. Flying squirrels love them, even when they're active like this other. And I've seen some that were big enough to have wood ducks. Wood ducks will take them over. I've seen tufted titmouse get in one. And so there's other bird species and other cavity dwellers that'll get in and use those trees. So that's a good part of the environment for them to do that ecosystem. Other cavity builders can use what they're not using. And this tool right here, this is an artificial cavity, or we call it an insert because we insert it into the tree. And it was developed after Hurricane Hugo. I forget the year of Hurricane Hugo, but they started working on these 1990. But so Hugo was close to that, and that was on the East Coast and North and South Carolina. It devastated a lot of their woodpecker populations and the cavity trees. So they said, we need a way to replace these trees that's quicker than a year or 2 or 3. And so they made these artificial cavities, and we can put those in the trees, and boom, there's a ready-made house.
Did they warm up to it?
Yep, they did. They did. In fact, let's see, I'll wait till I get to another picture here. I think it'll make more sense when I have a picture here. Now, the armature is on the front of that, and sometimes we just do part of it, put the armature on part of it. This one has it all the way up and down, is there. And now they put PVC pipe in the middle because that's to deter other woodpeckers. Like the pileated is real bad about this. The red bellies are bad about this, pecking that hole to make it bigger for them to use. So we're trying to deter that with all that hardwood. Now we're getting a lot of hardwood and metal out in the forest. So some people have complained about that. So what, lightning, so. But that they have warmed up to it. It's a very good tool. This is what one of those looks like on the interior. So it's similar in shape and size to the other. It's just take a piece of eastern red cedar, drill it with a hole saw, drill a hole this way, another one this way, kind of slanted like this is. So if any sap or any water got there, it'd come out, and put it right into the tree. This is what it looks like inside using a peeper scope. So it's similar to the other thing. If the woodpeckers are using this, which when they took this picture, looks like a woodpecker had been using it. And again, just pecking on the walls of it, and that soft cedar can come off and make their little wood chips there. And it's done by someone climbing up a tree with a short barred chainsaw, about a 12-inch barred chainsaw. They have one of those artificial cavities there, and they'll draw an outline of it. And then they use a chainsaw to cut out that excess wood there. They'll cut the rectangle out and then kind of chop it into a few little sections and use a chisel to get it out. And that'll look kind of like that.
We're making them lazy.
I know.
Just like the AI is making us dumber.
I know. But it is a good tool that has helped their populations increase. So having these ready-made, especially after a disaster, having these right here. On the state, one time when I first started working with the woodpeckers, I'd go to the annual woodpecker meeting, and the U.S. Forest Service here, they have most of them, and they were there and they were saying, well, 75% of our birds are using artificial cavities and that sort of thing. So I wonder about ours. So I went through and checked all the records, which one were artificial and which one were natural cavities that the birds built themselves. And ours was a flip-flop. 75% of our birds were using artificial cavities. We don't put in as much as the national forest, not close. But 75% were using the natural cavities that they built. And I said, well, our birds are more industrious. But this is what it looks like. They'll take that artificial cavity that was there, they'll take some wood putty and putty around on the outside, because after that hole is drilled here, they take a piece of pine plywood and put on top of that. So the hole's not exposed, but there's still like a little place there where there's could be a place where maybe sap could get in, but it's really tight on there. But there's the junction there where it could go in there. So they cover that with wood putty to kind of seal any holes or cracks or anything like that. Slide it into the tree like that. You can see the putty on this one that did that. Sometimes if it's a little, to make it more snug, they'll put shims in here. So they have like little wooden shims that they have to put in there to make sure it fits nice and tight. And the putty is in there good, so sap doesn't seep through these seams. and get into the tree, into the cavity. And so there's a ready-made cavity. And then we doctor up the front to make it as natural as we can. He put putty on the front of this and then spray paint it brown. And then either spray paint or putty these little lines and streaks on it. What do you think those are? Why does he do the little striping for it?
Sap.
Tell people there's a nest.
Actually, it's to tell the woodpeckers that it mimics sap. And it does help us too. It does help us to find that they're there. But it mimics that sap. So it kind of gets the woodpecker's attention. Now they're very territorial and they don't want to go in somebody else's territory. But once they get there, he says, they've tricked me, but hey, this is a cavity here. I'll take it. And they start pecking their own sap. Well, once they get in there, they start pecking their own sap wells and the real sap does come down. For the people, we put, on our state forest, we put number tags on them. So each one of our individual trees has number tags. And we paint it with the pukey green paint around there. And so that tells us that either is now being used by woodpeckers or it has in the past, or it's a brand new one and maybe they'll use them in the future. So all those green bands tell us, well, here is a red cockaded woodpecker cavity tree. So be careful around it.
So it doesn't mean it's artificial.
Correct. It could be either one. It could be natural or artificial. Now on my number tags, I don't know if everybody does this, and the guy before me started it, but he would put like a number like 12-6. And if it was an artificial cavity, we put I for insert. We just hammer the I and to just to know, but it doesn't matter. But they all get a tag. And the woodpeckers do take them up right away. In fact, you asked, did they take to them? Did they warm up to these artificial cavities? Well, yes, because that's helped our populations to expand. But then after we had some straight line winds. Oh, that'll come up here in a minute. I've got a slide on that. I'll talk about that when I have that slide. I think I've got that slide in here. This is the cluster area. Now I passed these out to everyone. If you don't have one, there might be an extra one there, and I've got an extra one here. But this is an old document. It's got good information in it, but they're using old terminology as far as what they call the groups of woodpeckers and what they call the grouping of their trees. So I probably shouldn't even be passing it out, but I think y'all can figure it out. But it's got good information and they're just sitting in my office doing nothing. So,
So we can keep them?
Yes, you can keep them. Yeah, these are for you to keep because it's got cool pictures inside. We'll talk about here in a minute. And it says, oh, mine says the cluster. Oh yeah, that's right. Okay. Anyway, I thought some of them have old terminology. So you may have old yellow ones. But if it says, because they used to call the cluster the colony. Yeah, so some yours may say colony. Oh man, I didn't realize there was a difference. I would have made photocopies. But anyway, this one does say cluster. So that's the more modern terminology that they've used for a couple decades. But it used to be called woodpecker colonies. Now they're called clusters because they decided, well, they're not true colonizers. And then the groups of woodpeckers used to be called clans. So I guess maybe a Scottish man started that. I don't know. But now they call them groups. So I don't know what the difference between a clan and a group is and what they're, or whatever, but they changed. So officially they are clusters and groups instead of colony and clans. Okay. So I'll be using cluster. Ma'am?
What's the difference between a cluster and?
Okay, the cluster is actually, I remember it by, it's actually the grouping of trees like this right here. And the group are the actual birds, the actual family group. I'm glad you said that because that gets confusing. But the cluster is the trees where they're using the cavities or they have in the past. So it's a grouping of all those trees that actually have cavities in them for woodpeckers to use or that they're using right then, plus a 200-foot buffer around it. And the only reason we designate that is because there are certain management activities you can and can't do within the cluster during nesting season. Otherwise, it's just like, it's an invisible line. Although we've marked some of ours just, but the green paint shows the individual cavity trees. Each one we see in this picture, this was set up for us moving woodpeckers into it. So we put new artificial cavities in there and they have the fake spray marks right there. And so there's 4 right here. And also sometimes we'll put in artificial cavities because we're supposed to have 4 usable cavities per family group out there, at least 4. And so if we're lacking, if some of our other trees die or something happens to them, we'll replace some of the trees with the artificial cavities. So the cluster should have at least 4. And usually there's a lot more because there's old natural cavities that they have. insane in this cluster right here, and the 200-foot buffer. So that's the cluster area, and we can't, like inside that cluster area during nesting season, we can't run machinery, we can't harvest trees or anything like that. We can prescribe burn, but we cannot do anything with heavy equipment or anything inside there during nesting season. Okay, but other times of the year, there's more you can do in there. That's the only reason we designate clusters.
Do they have a preferred height above ground?
I do, I do.
Well, I think the size of the ladder makes a difference on.
Right, yeah, well, that makes a difference. So, they used to put these up, these artificial ones up at 30 or 32 feet, the woodpeckers themselves. It depends on this this is the mid-story, these little trees and bushes that are out here, that's the mid-story. They don't like mid-story very high. And in fact, if it gets so high, it gets close to their cavities, they will just abandon the area and go find another area, because predators could climb up those other trees and get in there. It's not a clear flyway. If a hawk's chasing them or something, they can't get in there. So the mid-story trees right here, we like to keep that down. We need this the ground cover and a little bit of low mid-story and things like that for the insects and other wildlife, but we don't want it to go too high. But I've seen them in areas where we couldn't work on the habitat very much, and the mid-story got up pretty high. So if they're still building out there, they're gonna build higher. So a lot of our trees are 40 feet, and a lot of them are 30 feet now that we have the ability to do more habitat work. And now the artificial clusters, if it's a good habitat, they'll put them up at 22 feet, and that's great. I've been up as high as 60 feet before. So when it was 60 feet, it was inside a cluster that didn't have as much work done on it. It was kind of a wet area and things where we didn't have the capabilities of doing the habitat work. So the woodpeckers built higher to get away from that mid-story. And I climbed 60 feet once, and I'm not gonna do it again. This was early in my career when I did that. And in fact, it took me 2 days, because I went there and said, man, that's a long way. So here I'm climbing the ladders, and you'll see those here in a little bit. And then I got up there. Well, when I first started my belt, I have a climbing belt, and it wouldn't go around the tree. That's how big the tree was. So, oh darn, I can't do this today. And so I had to go borrow another belt, and I put 2 belts together and went up there. So I have no excuse now. So I went up there 60 feet, and it was just spooky. And so I said, okay, I'm not gonna do this anymore. And I'm sure not at this point in my career. So 50 feet is maybe shaky now, but most of mine are down pretty low now, and we have the habitat in good shape. It's in better shape now. So they're building lower cavities for me now. Yes.
Their primary predator is the rat snake, or is it a hawk?
It is the rat snake. Yes, that is their primary predator, is the rat snake. Hawks could be a problem too. And it's important for them to have enough cavities, because if their cavities are destroyed and they're roosting out in the trees, then owls could be a problem, besides being out in the weather. Yeah, but the major predator is the rat snake, right?
Question.
When it's nesting season, you said you can't bring in machinery and do work then.
Mhm.
Why is that? I assume it's disturbing them.
Right, you don't want to disturb that pattern of them nesting for one, breeding and nesting. And then if they're feeding the young, you don't want to disturb that pattern of the adults in the group coming back and forth and feeding the young. So it's just a disturbance thing. Yeah.
So each owl has its own cavity. It's not a shared family.
No, they live close together, because they'll be like the trees they're in are probably, they don't have to be this close together, but they're probably pretty close. And they can be out a little bit farther, but and sometimes they're a lot farther depending on the availability of trees, but each one is in the cavity, just one bird.
So what about the young one?
We'll get to that. Very good. Okay, so this again is the cluster. And this is, you can see it's got a little grub worm in there. And I remember where this was taken, because you see holes already in this tree.
Mhm.
This tree, and it had an artificial cavity there, but this tree was attacked, I think, by beetles and killed. But this bird is on here not for the cavity, because it's not gonna live in a dead tree, but for the larvae, insect larvae that are there. And it probably pulled it out of one of these little niches right there. So it's got exit holes there for some of the wood borers, probably the wood borers going in there, those big grub worms. And so again, it's a buffet for the woodpeckers. So they're not here for the cavity tree itself. They're here for the food that's associated with a dead tree. So our woodpecker families, ideally, we have a breeding male and a breeding female and a helper bird or two. And helper birds are almost always male offspring of previous year's hatches. And those helper birds help to defend the territory. They help to incubate the eggs when there's eggs in the cavity. They help to feed the young when there's young are hatched and in the cavity. And they're really waiting for dad to kick off. So when he kicks off, one of them can take up the top male spot, mating spot, and then they have to find another female and keep the family going. So a healthy family has at least one helper bird, and sometimes I've seen 2 or 3 or more. And occasionally you'll have just a breeding male and female, and yeah, they can breed and they can successfully hatch, but it's a lot harder for them to feed the young and successfully raise the young and defend the territory. And once in a while there's always an argument, well, is one bird, is that really a group and all that sort of thing? So we do consider one bird a group, but they're usually calling for mates to come in during the breeding season. But that's the ideal family group. And
You see an association between the number of helpers and the number of young that survive?
I don't know of an official one, but I kind of see a difference in, yeah, how many survive, how many actually hatch, and how many survive to fledging. I kind of see one. So I believe there is, just from, I don't know if there probably is a study with official numbers, but I kind of noticed that too. So this is the peeper scope. And you should tell that's an artificial cavity there. And you can see this is an active tree because why? It's got red. The sap is not just the sap being there, but the sap is fresh and sticky and not dry and gray and things like that. And my reddish right there where they've been pecking there, they've been using this tree for quite a while because it's full of sap. But it's one of the artificial cavities. And this is the peeper scope that I use a lot. Nesting season is coming up. I mean, it's like, this is April. Okay, we're very close. Well, I mean, we're in nesting season. We're very close to getting eggs on the birds, I imagine. And so it's basically a long telescoping surveyor's pole. And it's been adapted for this kind of work. And on the top is a probe that has 2 lights and a camera in it. And down here on the ground, I have a monitor and a battery that it's hooked up to. And once I get the probe into the cavity, whether it's artificial or natural, I can turn it on and see what's in there. I didn't bring this tool today because it's not working right, but I got some used ones from the National Forest in Louisiana that's coming to me. It's just hadn't made it here yet. But so here it is. I've got it into the cavity there. And then down here is the monitor. Run down here, so it's a lot easier, because before when I was checking nest, if I wanted to see the young or how old they were, or even if there was eggs in the nest, I had to climb up with my climbing ladders and have a little, like what the dentist used in your mouth or a mechanical used in a vehicle trying to see in the engine where we dropped a screw or something like that, have that and a little drop light to even see in there. So it was very labor intensive and took a lot of time, and the birds were upset for a long time. So this peeper scope has been a wonder.
Peeper scope.
Yeah. And there it is. So that's my monitor down on the ground. There's 4 eggs in there. And like I say, commonly I do see 3 or 4 eggs in there. And I told you everyone in the family group, they have a job to do, but they have their own cavity. And the male usually picks the newest, cleanest cavity and the best best resin producing tree, because the female during nesting season will lay her eggs in the male's cavity tree. So in the morning, when all the birds get up, whether it's nesting or not, they peck around, work on the resin wells every day, so they'll flow fresh sap, and then they go off foraging on the forest. They can go off, they for several acres can go off there foraging for food on their own, come back just before dusk and go back into their cavities. Well, during nesting season, when they do all that, they do the pecking with the resin wells and everything, and the female's going to go in there and lay her eggs, and everybody's off foraging. She'll lay 1 egg a day until she's done laying, and then they start sitting on and incubating the eggs. So at night, when the male comes back to go to roost, he's got in his tree, so he's got the egg or eggs, however many's in there. So he's sitting on the eggs overnight. During the daytime, he's going to swap with the others in the family group, and they're going to sit on the egg. And at night, dad's sitting on the eggs. When the eggs hatch, the whole family group chips in feeding the young. but at night, dad's gonna sleep with the kids. So, well, that's a pretty good strategy. So mom goes back to her cabin tree and he's got the young in there.
Are they monogamous?
Yeah, that pretty much, but if something happened to one of them, like if the female died and another one came up, they would still breed.
So how long is nesting season?
It officially, it's like starts middle of March to middle of July, but around here, they don't start laying eggs like on the Jones. I can count on like the middle of April. Like I used to get count like April 12th. Okay, they're probably laying eggs on the Jones. Well, it's not that exact anymore, but it's usually middle of April or towards the end of April. They'll lay eggs through March, through May. I'm sorry, start middle of April, lay eggs through any time in May. Every great once in a while, if they've lost a clutch of eggs to snakes or squirrels or something else happens, sometimes they will re-nest. But often it's so late in the summer when they re-nest, they nest. I've seen them lay eggs in the very first week of June and they just don't hatch. So it usually gets too hot in there, I think, and the eggs just aren't viable. So, but official nesting is like middle of March to middle of July. Around here, they're usually done laying eggs by first week or two of May. And then the young fledge 26 days after hatching. So female lays her eggs. After she's done laying all her eggs, it takes 10 to 12 days for those eggs to hatch, so fairly quickly. And then 26 days after that, the young are gonna be fully feathered and fledged.
Wow.
So we're usually done with nesting season around here in June.
Wow.
And some places maybe they go into July, but usually not here.
So they mate for life. Did somebody ask that question?
Yeah. Well, she said if they're monogamous, I said, yeah, they do mate for life, but if one of them loses their mate, then if another one comes in, they will, yeah.
See, we should take lesson from this.
So this was a cool picture because I put my peeper scope in there. One of the things I know that a sign that they are actually maybe have eggs or starting to nest is they're in the middle of the day when they're normally off foraging. They're there in the cluster area. And if I walk up there and a bird flies out of the cavity, which they're usually not in the cavity, I said, ooh, there may be eggs in there. And if there's young, I can usually hear them, but usually I'm starting to monitor them way before that. So I said, there may be eggs in there, but I want to verify. So I can put my peeper scope in there. So every great once in a while, there's a bird still in there that's sitting on it. And here comes this big black probe in there. And they probably have a heart attack, so they think it's a snake or something. That's in there, and I've had them come out and peck at it before. But then I pull it out, and then they'll fly out so I can see what's under them. But this was a cool picture because I actually got someone on the ground took a picture from the monitor, and you can see there's 2 eggs under this one. And actually, if I see a bird in there, and if I could see some eggs, or if I just see her, and I don't want to keep it in there too long and stress them too much. So I'll take a few seconds to look. If I don't see anything, I'm going to assume there's eggs, but I like to know how many. And then I pull the probe out, and then I don't bother them anymore with that, but they probably fly out after that. If I go to a tree and there's 1 egg in there, and so great, they laid the egg today. So I don't even have to come back to that one until a week and a half later if I want to. But usually the next week I'll go and peeper the same tree, and if there's 3 eggs in there, I know that I wrote down the calendar date when they had that egg number 1. And then egg number 2, number 3. So from the 3rd day, then I start counting 10 or 12. So I know where they're going to hatch. I still don't have to come back until we can band them between 5 and 10 days old. But I like to do 6 or 7 days. 5 is a little small to hold all the bands that we put on them. And I hate to bother them that small, but 6 and 7, even 8 is ideal to me. Around here, if I wait till 9 days, their eyes are starting to open and they can dodge my noose. So that's why I like to, but that peeper scope and being there at the right time saves me even extra trips of coming out there and looking at the trees to know when to come back and band.
Donna,
Yeah.
what is your role in terms of your banding, you're climbing up, and I know that's a very restricted activity. So are you part of a group that's monitoring this endangered species?
Right, yeah, you could kind of say that. I never looked at it that way, but I am.
Is it at the state level? Is it
As a national level, or, of course, the southern region here. I monitor it. I have to have all the permits. I have to have a Fish and Wildlife Service permit, which I have to renew once in a while. I have to have a Parks and Wildlife estate permit as well. And then I have a banding permit just for putting the numbered bands on there, and another permit to put there's auxiliary bands, little colored bands on there. And that's usually kind of in one. So I have at least 3 permits to do what I'm doing. and report on every year, that sort of thing. So I am kind of part of a group because all across the South, since this is an endangered species, and there's groups of nearby states that kind of get together and meet each year, like we're the Western Gulf Coast Translocation Cooperative, so I'm part of that. Yes, we monitor, yes, we send our numbers and other thing, management activities to the Fish and Wildlife Service every year. But we also meet once a year because of translocation, which I'll talk more about that in a little bit, of moving birds from one place to another. Besides getting the information that we need for the populations, we also see where birds are needed. We might move birds from one population to another. And so I guess I am part of a bigger group that's monitoring, because the other biologists all across the range of this woodpecker are doing monitoring and taking numbers and stuff like that. Yes.
Do you just cover South Texas or what's your territory?
I just got, well, East Texas, all of East Texas, but I don't have far to go because there's not that many woodpeckers here. So I cover Montgomery County, our state forest here, and Cherokee County for the woodpeckers anyway, is what I cover with our ID Fairchild State Forest up there. So I monitor those, but also work with other landowners. Some are private landowners. I don't manage their birds. I don't have the time for that, but they have other private consultants that do that. But sometimes I would work with them a little bit too and keep track of their numbers. So, and they're in other counties all across this East and Southeast Texas. So
Those permits, are they federal or state?
both. I have a federal one with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's the first one. That's the top one. And then one with the state. So Texas.
The reason I'm asking, a person like yourself should be exempt from that many.
Oh.
Right, I mean.
Well, they give us permits to even handle the birds, even to monitor, like the morning roost checks at times that may disturb them. I have to have a permit. So we have permits. So I have those permits, and that gives me the opportunity the legality to go out there and handle the birds and do the trapping. On my permit, it says, yes, she can capture them with a noose, and yes, she can use the mist net to catch them. And yes, you can work on any lands in Texas with this permit. So, and then again, the state permits, they basically, so. And then the banding, and then I couldn't band without having the banding permit and get my little bands, a little silver bands, kind of like you'd see on a duck or a goose or something like that, that are numbered. Each one is numbered. So yep, I have, and people that are with me can do some of the same stuff, but if I'm not there, if I don't have anyone else on my permit, they can't go do up that stuff without me. So we all have to have our permits and keep up reporting and that sort of stuff. Now this one, if any of y'all have been around long enough to know Debbie Layer, super lady, and we lost her a few years back, but this is like a once in a lifetime photo. And I named it Shift Change. And this is taken during nesting season, and she's contributed a lot to all my photos here. And one adult bird is flying out of the cavity and one is coming in. So that tells me, okay, hey, I'm ready to go eat or stretch my wings or something. You come here and sit on these eggs. So they're changing shifts there to when one bird is leaving, someone else has to be on those eggs all the time. And that's why we don't like a lot of the machinery or anything around, where we don't want the birds to fly off and the eggs aren't being sat on. And in fact, we put up some signs to kind of keep people from going back and forth in there quite a bit. We don't want to disturb this natural cycle of their breeding season. And there's a little chick that's hatched right there. They're like little naked, little gummy worm birds. You can see another one is there's one that's already out, and there's one starting to pip out right there. So catching these right there, okay, there's day one. So I know how old my birds are, so I don't have to come back until I'm ready to band them at day 6 or 7 or 8. It's always cool to see that. And you don't think, how does that little body fit in one of those eggs? In fact, that's one on our little paper that I followed to determine the age of the chicks. And one of them says, looks like, the body can fold up and fit in the egg. I said, I know that's been just out just for a day, and I don't see how that fits, but. And this is one of the adults. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, it's a buccal sac, the sac that they have the poop in. So they're keeping the crib clean, and they'll go out and drop that out, and that's just a little sack of maybe bird poop.
Do they drop that straight down, or do they take it somewhere else?
I think they drop it straight down. I've never found any. That's a good point. If they drop it straight down, but so many things in the woods will come back and eat, like eggshells. They'll throw out eggshells too. So eggshells you often do not see, but sometimes you see them. But all that sort of thing. There's so many things else in the woods that are gonna take care of that, clean it up. I don't see them break. And every member of the family group, once the chicks hatch, everybody in the family group is going to help feed them. And these birds, well, the adult as well as the young are going to eat a lot of insect larvae and ants, flake away the bark and maybe find ants or scorpions or centipedes under there. And a little bit of berry in their diet, not much, a little bit of berry on their diet. So when they're foraging for food, it's mainly on pine trees, some on the hardwood trees and any dead trees that are gonna have insect larvae in them. That's a buffet, so they'll go eat that. So they're, of course, the adults in the family, the breeding pair and the helper birds are feeding themselves when they go out, but they're also coming back and feeding the young. And so this is one, I took a picture of it just before capturing it. I think this was the only one in the nest and I think that one's 8 days old. And to capture it, so I got this picture right here before I took it out to band. But you can see how the feathers are coming in. That's very close to 9 days old probably. This one is a young one and I can, let's see, I think the next picture you can see better. Yeah. And Debbie also took this picture. I think. Yeah, she did. And that's a young that's in the nest waiting for the adults to come by. This one probably heard us walking through there as food. If it's able to stick up and poke its head out like that, that tells me it's very close to fledging. And seeing its feathers on it, seeing all the feathers on it, and then it being able to reach up that high, climb up that high, and see that's pretty close to fledging. I don't want to peeper then. They don't let me peeper past day 21 or 22, because then those are young enough or big enough to get out and possibly fly and fall down. So I don't want us to make them flush and fall down. So I try not to do that. I don't do it that late. But can anybody identify the gender of this bird? It's hard to see.
Just by looking.
It's a male. Yeah. And on top there's a little bit, you can't, I mean, it's probably harder for y'all to see on the screen. But yeah, there's a red dot right there. So there's a dot. And if I get to peeper soon enough, like about day 19 or 20, I can look on top. If there's a spot right there that's not, I can see sometimes the red starting to come in or not totally filled in. I said, oh, that's gonna be filled in with red feathers. So I know that's the male. And if it's just the solid black, then I know it's a female.
How old does that red dot move to the spot here?
They'll be, let's see, if they hatch in May and then about October, they have a molt and get their adult feathers in without that. So about 6 or 7 months.
Hey, Doug, once they fledge, do they go back in their hole or are they, where?
They have to find their own. That's why it's important to have extra cavities out there, either natural or artificial, because they have to find their own. They may roost in the treetops for a few days, but that's dangerous. They're in the weather. They're susceptible to predators. But they do have to find their own cavity. In fact, when they first fledge, they're kind of hanging out in the cluster area, just hanging out in the trees while the adults go off foraging and still bring them food. But after a few days, then they go with the family group and go off foraging for food, and then they have to find their own room.
So what is your population right now?
On the Jones State Forest, we have about 3 family groups. And on the Fairchild, we're down to 2 family groups out there. So numbers of birds. So we probably have 9 or 10, maybe 11 total birds, but before nesting season, I would be
Have you ever
surprised.
had more than that?
Yeah, we've had, now the guy before me, when he did the monitoring, we've got like, historically, we have 16 different cluster areas out there, but not all of them were still active or still had trees. When I came on, there were some that we could declare abandoned because they didn't even have live cavity trees in them yet. And at one time, I would say that we've had 7 family groups before. At one time, the records said 11 or 12, but the more we learned about the birds, we found out, I don't think it was really that many, because some were like living next door, but they captured a nearby cluster. Our clusters are kind of close together in places. So I have a feeling when I started monitoring and knew more about the bird than I could tell, this one was actually working together. So we may not have had 11 or 12, but that would just take back researching the old records.
Still in trouble.
Yeah, but we're a very isolated population because there's urbanization all around us. I might have a map on here that shows that. Urbanization all around us, so it's hard for the birds to come in and for extra habitat out there. And we've only got so much space. In fact, looking at the space of our mature pine trees, we probably couldn't hold six families. So,
Is it one lady female per family?
yes, yeah, what's a one lane female per family, that's it. And she'll only lay once during the year unless they lose a clutch of eggs, and then she may lay another one. But they're not gonna lay a clutch this month and next month go lay another. It's not that. I saw a hand over here earlier.
Well, you kind of answered it.
Oh, okay.
I was just wondering how many and why, well, why there aren't more than what we have, because I don't know that they're on the side of Jones where the ranger station is.
Yeah, we have,
They're there.
yeah, they're there. Uh-huh.
But it
And on
seems
the,
like with the size of the forest, there would be more because there's so many pine trees.
right. There's so many, but each family group, like the National Forest has to set aside at least, depending on the quality of the habitat, at least 125 acres. And if there's not enough of the large mature pine trees there, you have to expand out to 150, maybe 200 acres of large mature pine trees, open space pine trees there. And for private landowners and for the state, we're following the private landowner guidelines, and you can have down to 75 acres per family group, but you also have to have so many numbers and of certain diameter pine trees for each family group to hang on or to grow. And that's where, so we sometimes have to set aside more. And of course, they don't know where our boundaries are. They just go where they want to, but as far as saying, hey, we have this many acres for this family group, that's enough. There's plenty of basal area of the pine trees, of the 10 inches and above pine trees and that sort of thing.
Are they still endangered or are they threatened?
They're still endangered, but at the end of this, I'll talk about that. Okay. How am I time wise? Am I good?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, maybe this will tell me.
11:15.
Oh, we're good. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, I'll talk about that at the end. Okay.
So it takes 2 years for them to make their cavity.
Yeah.
So where are they staying whilst they're making the cavity?
If there's no other cavities that they're living in, if there are no others around there, they're hanging out in the tops of the trees. So that's why it's important for us to have extras out there. Because I mean, if they really get after it, they can take a year, but often it's closer to 2 years. So. And so this one, once it fledges, it has to find its own cavity. Now now about September, if there's a female there, the males will usually hang behind to be helper birds, but about September, October, well, actually September. Anyway, the females, probably closer to October because we kept from October. So in the fall, the females, if there's no place for them in the family group, if there's still a breeding female there and her dad is there, she's going to fly off and try to find her own male somewhere else, an unmated single male somewhere, or another place to start her own family group. And that's why the helper birds are almost always males, because they stay behind to help defend the territory and help keep the family going there. And this is one of the adult birds coming in to feed the young. Now, this is how I band the birds. We band the birds to keep track of where and when these birds were hatched and where they were reared. And if we're doing the translocation, which I'll talk about more later, we need to be banding to keep track of the birds. So the accepted way to do it is I've got these Swedish climbing ladders here. They're like 10-foot sections, and I can stack them one on top of the other, chain them around the tree. And I've got a climbing belt. I've got the harness and then the belt that goes around the tree. And there may be a better picture later on we can see, but by standing on the rungs of the ladder and the belt around the tree, if I lean back, then that's holding me in place. So I've got my feet secured and the belt is holding me up there. So when I get up to where I want to be and where the cavity entrance is, I've got both hands free. So to capture these little ones, so before I even go up there to capture them, I've peepered them, make sure everybody's there, make sure they're the right age. And then I have a noose, which I'll show you out in the field. It's a surgical rubber tubing that's about that big around and flexible. And I've got a 50-pound test fishing line. I have 3 loops there that are threaded down through that piece of hose, and I have 3 loops that are pulled out, and I go up to the tree. I go up to the tree and say, "This is the cavity here." I'll take my hand and I put it over that cavity. So even us, if we close our eyes and we do this, we can tell there's a shadow there. And these birds, their eyes are closed at this point. They can tell there's a there's a shadow there. They've also been hearing activity. So what do you think the birds do? Yeah. They think, oh, one of the big birds, mama or dad's here, brother's here to feed me, and they stick their heads up and start chirping. And that's what I want them to do, because I can then thread my noose down in there, and I can't see what I'm doing. It's only 2 inches, so I can't get my hands in there. But I can feel when I hit bottom, and then I pull back, close up my nooses.
What if
And-
you, the neck by mistake?
Yeah, usually by the neck. It's almost always by the neck. Sometimes I've caught a wing, and I hate to do that because that's not real secure and I don't want to hurt them. But I do have them by the neck, so I pull them up slowly. This is an endangered species, so the whole time I'm not breathing. Hold my breath, okay, until it's in my hand. Okay, gotta be careful. And so there, you can kind of see and hear, there's the feet sticking up right there. So it's in the noose, and then I get it up pretty soon and take the noose off right away because it's not tight on there. So I've got him, I take it off of that noose, and I've got a soft pouch right here. I put it in the pouch and then go fishing for more if there's more in there. One time I've caught 3 before. That's my record. I've had 3 nooses. I caught 3 at one time before, but that was cool. I thought, wow, I was bragging about that. But that's not preferable because it's harder to get them through that. It depends on their age. And back then I would band them a little younger when we could just do two bands on one leg instead of the 3 we do now. So I could band them younger. So fortunately I got them out of there without hurting them. But if you have more than one and they're 8 or 9 days old, they're gonna be hard to get through there. And so pull them through there and be very careful the whole time. Once I have them all, and see my soft pouch is right down there, I'm putting it in the pouch, go fishing for more, and then I have my pouches on a rope, and I lower that rope down to the ground where somebody's waiting there to take the pouch off the rope and keep it in the shade. And I climb down off the ladders. I'll leave them up there because I have to go back up. So I climb down off the ladders, and I have a banding kit. So I have the Fish and Wildlife Service, or actually now it's USGS, or numbered band, the silver band right there. And I have the pliers where I can put that on. I'll show you that out in the field. Not banding, but I'll just show you the pliers. And put that band on them so they all have their own distinct number. And since if you're out in the field and the birds are mature and they're on the tree, you can see that silver band, but no way you're gonna read the numbers. So each one I give an individual color coding of these auxiliary bands, which are the little ones here that have a little slit on the side. And I also put those on the birds in combination. So each bird, they may have, for 1 or 2 years, they may have the light green on top of the silver band, but their other leg, the right leg, is going to be different for all of them. It may be orange, yellow, blue, or something like that. So they'll all be different. So somebody with a spotting scope or good binoculars, if they see that, I say, try to get the color combination if you can, because that's how I can identify if it's my bird. And there's been one time where we had a bird that came off the Sam Houston. So it was able to travel over there back many years ago off the Sam Houston. And I told the biologist there, I said, it's my bird now.
So it doesn't constrict the growth of the fish?
It does not. It has to, their legs get a little bit longer after this, but not much wider. So they're banded for life once they're like that. And part of the banding process that's the hardest is to kind of keep these toes that are back this way, keep them pushed forward while I put the bands on, because it would be disastrous if I put the bands on their toes. Yes.
Do you have to take photos of what you're doing? Is that part of?
No, it's not part of it, but
It really is.
I always have a lot of interested people, and they're good photographers, and some of them are master naturalists, so then I get great photos from others. I don't have to, but it happens. And probably the most videoed and photographed RCWs in the world are on the Jones State Forest. So if you go to YouTube and say WG Jones State Forest and red cockaded woodpecker, you'll find some videos, and some of them with me. And we used to have a semi-pro videographer out there, Ken Cram, but he moved to California now. But he's done a lot of videos out there on not just the woodpeckers, but a lot of things, other things on the forest. And he's taken some of us with translocation or banding or whatever. And I warn you, some of them are kind of dorky because we're trying to make them exciting. But anyway, he's got a lot of good videography and photos of the birds. And again, a lot of other people have taken photos. When I'm done banding all the little ones down here, then I put them back in the bag. I climb up the ladder, but not with the birds. The birds are still down there, and then somebody clamps the bag back onto my rope, and I pull them up And I take them one at a time and push their little gummy worm bodies on down there, and they tumble down to the bottom.
Oh my God, did
Yeah.
I get hurt?
No, that's the acceptable way. They're good and flexible. And the whole time the adults are fussing at us, but they're not dive bombing me or anything, thank goodness. But I put them all in there. If they're kind of stuck at the entrance, I have in my vest, I have a little pin right here, an ink pen, that I can just kind of poke them a little bit, and then they finish tumbling down. So I'll make sure they're all the way in there, then I can breathe and take the ladders off the tree. And that's mission accomplished. So after I come down off the tree and get the ladders off the tree, here come the adults going back and forth, checking them out, and go back to the feeding and their natural behavior. One bad thing about other cavity dwellers getting into these trees, the flying squirrels are a cute, nice, soft, real neat mammal. But they can get into, besides the rat snake, they're another detriment to the woodpeckers, because they will get in there and crush and eat the eggs. They could kill the young and just take over a cavity. So that's one thing that sometimes we have to extract those. And I'll see if I have a picture of that, and I'll tell you about that here in a minute. If not, I'll go ahead and tell you without that. To get them out of the cavity trees. Now, if it's an old, dead, abandoned RCW tree, I don't bother with them. If they're in a tree that the birds are not using, I don't mess with them, just so they'll stay there. But if they are in an active tree, if I see the woodpeckers, they go up there, like they want to go in the cavity, but they won't go in there, and they jump back once in a while. And I say, there may be squirrels in there, and I'll see squirrels, and that's one time I will extract them, because it'll prevent them from having a place to roost and maybe even to nest. So I've done that before. But there'll be sometimes 4 or 5 of them in there.
Oh my God.
Yeah, let's see. Oh yeah, there they are close up. If I have the peeper scope and look it in there, I see at least 3 in there, and their tails kind of curl up, and I see 2 sets of eyes and ears. And sometimes they go in there, and all I see is a ball of fur that's going. It's breathing like this. I say, yeah, there's some in there. Even though I know what that is. So I say, well, I have to come back later and get these out of here. So I usually don't have my extraction equipment right away. Okay, good. I do have pictures of this. This is the old fashioned way to get them out of the trees and I used to do this. I'd climb up in the trees with my climbing ladders and climbing belt. And, another mechanic's tool, like the grabbers, you can push the end of it, and the little metal grabbers that are like this, you get one of those, get a can of ether or starter fluid. And I climb up in there, and the way to, and a little trap had like it's almost like a little tube that's been made out of wire. So I'll climb up there. I know the squirrels are in there. When I first get up there, climb up there so they don't escape while I'm getting my equipment ready. I'll stuff a glove or something else in there, a rag, so they don't leave. And then the old fashioned way, I'd go up there and I would spray some of the ether in there and close it up a little bit till they kind of knock out and not inhale myself. And then I go in there with my grabbers to grab them out. Well, my success with that was maybe 50-50. I lost a lot that way. And some that weren't knocked out, they'd get out and go around the tree. And I've got stories about grabbing grabbing a squirrel that I couldn't even see. Is on the back side of the belt. You can see right here, there's my belt on the back side. The squirrel got out and got away from me. The guy with me said, it's on the back of the tree, about the same level as your belt. I said, okay, I've got one shot at this. And I leaned forward and reached around, and I got it with my gloves. So that didn't always happen. And then one time it fell on my boot. I said, I got one shot at this too, and I got it. But most of the time I can't get them, and they go gliding off, or if they go to the ground, they go climb up the next tree and go gliding off. So I mentioned that one time, and we were in a meeting, and a guy from an Arkansas biologist talked about using backpack vacuum cleaners. So what? So you do that, and you get the squirrels out of there. Now, the old fashioned way, and even this way, most everybody else does away with them on the site, and I can't do that. So I don't have to do as many as they do, but I'll take some, maybe use them for an educational activity one time, then I go take them and release them. And so don't tell Huntsville State Park, but they have a lot of our squirrels. Similar habitat right by your tree. So I've released them there before.
So they don't have woodpeckers over there?
No, not the red cockaded, they don't have them, yeah. So I used to release them behind a house I used to live in, because there was a creek nearby there. I used to release them there, then somebody told me about in the attic of their house, they'd get flying squirrels and mess all sorts of stuff. So I'll just stop that. So I'll get back to it. But this vacuum cleaner, I said, wow, that's really cool. And so I started looking, and they were like $500. And so I said, well, just ask our associate director to get you a vacuum cleaner. I said, I can't ask the associate director for $500 to buy a vacuum cleaner to get squirrels out of a tree. Well, Heartwood Master Naturalist stepped up and got one. And so they paid for that. That's awesome. And we've also vacuumed the Heartwood office back there with it before. But it's there's no blades in there. It's not like a Vegematic. So but it's not, it's just a bag in there. So I climb up there and I have to have a compressor. Yeah, a compressor. And to hook it up to, because it's got an electrical cord. And I'm up there and then I have the switch and I can turn on the switch. And I know they're in there. I take out my little plug and I had to put some modifications on the hose so it would fit down and get inside there. And I tested this on like a little bottle, a medicine bottle or something in our office before. I said, all right, that works good. So I said, I'm gonna go to the Jones State Forest. I know where there's some, I'm gonna get them. I had to have a ground crew with the ladders, but I'm not gonna tell anybody else. I don't want anybody to see and stress up, messes up. Well, there was somebody with Parks and Wildlife there that was doing some other study. So, okay, you can come along. And then there's some other, I don't remember if they're national naturalists or some were, but they came to all watch and said, oh man, I've got an audience. So the first one to go up there and poof, it did perfect because it got the squirrel on the side of the side right here. He's still there. I've got my gloves and I turn off the suction, put him in my little cage and go do some more. And then there's a video of this too. And people don't usually know it until I tell them. But one time I was up there and I said, well, this is working out fine, you know. And I went in there and I got one and it went down the hose. So in the video you can see my face go. And I knew there was no blades or anything, but the people don't know that, but still went down in there and said, I gotta climb down. There's one inside here. So I climbed down there and he was kind of dazed, but he was really ticked off. So I had to catch it again to put it in my cage so it wouldn't be all for naught. So that was kind of hairy, and that's happened a few times, but not very often. But it is a humane way and easier way to capture them and get those squirrels out. I don't do it very often, but when there's a need, that's part of the management of it. This is the rat snake, which are known for climbing up even like brick walls and stuff like that. And the rough furrowed bark of a pine tree is okay for them. And they can sense eggs and things like that. So they can climb up there and eat the eggs. That's why they're the major predator. So they can eat the eggs or the young. And so if I go 1 week and there was eggs, I go back the next week and there's nothing there, then and there's nothing on no eggshells or anything on the ground, that tells me that a rat snake got up there. He got past that sap layer somehow and got up in there because there's no evidence, and he swallowed all the evidence. And so sometimes again, they'll re-nest and sometimes not. So the sap layer, that's one major thing for having that, the sap layer. It's a good banner, you know, it's like you have the hole here and all the sap here is a good banner for other woodpeckers flying by. Is that, oh, this is a family group here, let's move on. Or for you know, if a hawk or something is coming after them, they need to see their hole, or they're just coming back to roost, they can see their hole real well and just pop right in there. But the main thing is that fresh sap, keep that fresh sap flowing every day, and to deter the snakes. Because if the snakes get up there and it irritates their belly scales or even gums them up, they'll back on off the tree, or I've even seen video of them falling off the tree. So that's a deterrent for them, but sometimes they can find a way to get past it. And also that's why the woodpeckers don't like another tree nearby, because if they have a good sap layer, but here's an oak tree and the snake can come up here and go across there to get into the cavity, then that's dangerous too. These are southern pine beetles. So this is how the trees, you know, they will give off, especially with the woodpeckers pecking the cavities, and there's alpha pinings, the smell of pine, like turpentine coming off these trees. That's what attracts the southern pine beetles. And so they're bad about them, and the other bark beetles too, but especially the southern pine beetles are bad about attacking those woodpecker trees. And that's another use that we had for that verbenone, I think I said the wrong, I said frontalin before, that's the attractant, but verbenone is the one that repels them. So putting verbenone on trees that's starting to get attacked by southern pine beetles, we put that on there, that deters more southern pine beetles from coming over. And this is a tree that was attacked and probably killed by southern pine beetle right there. And that's do you know Rayford Sandell? Yeah, he used to be law enforcement and he retired and started doing woodpeckers, and he re-retired, and then that's when I started doing woodpeckers. This is where Ips and graver beetles, that the southern pine beetles have the little popcorn looking whitish sap balls that are on the outside there. This is the Ips and graver beetles, which when they go in, some of the sawdust comes out, some of that's why they're little frass, they're a little pitch tubes of sap, or it tells you it's the different species of beetle, but they can also kill their cavity trees. This is that frontline wind I told you about, 1990 or 91, I think, it had to be 91. Came through and blew down a lot of trees, even in Angelina County where I was, but also a lot in Sabine County, and that destroyed a lot of those trees there. And you can see the US Forest Service used to, oh, this is on US Forest Service land. They used to also use that green, now they changed to white. But you can see how it devastated a whole cluster area of trees right here and some of the cavity trees. So the birds were going to have to roost out in the open. So a lot of biologists got together and started putting in artificial cavities. And one guy said, well, as soon as I was finished for the day putting in artificial cavities, you know, nearby where there's pine trees there for the woodpeckers, I put my chainsaw in the back of the pickup truck, and here come an RCW, which is short for red cockaded woodpecker, and flew right into the tree. So he took to it right away.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, it doesn't kill the trees, but it does tend to make a little bit weaker where you put the artificial or where the natural cavity is, so they could break over. This was one of the hurricanes that did this, but fortunately we had some monies from master naturalists and other people and from budgets to put in more to replace these that were out there. Okay, so I said the cluster area needs to be nice and open like this, not a real dense stand, not the, I think y'all may understand basal area, not a real dense stand. Even if it's pine trees, it can't be too dense. So we like to keep the stands about 60 or 70 feet of basal area per acre. And nice and open like this, but to keep it open like this, you know, we have to be management for it. And so a lot of times they'll get like this. There's the yopon. Somebody wasn't sure about yopon. We'll probably see some today. So I'll remind me to point it out. But there's the yopon thicket, and things will get bigger and bigger. And the guidelines say don't let it get higher than 7 feet. And so there's a lot of things that you can do for that. One of them is the prescribed burn, which is a healthy forest management tool anyway. Now, a lot of the things that we do for the woodpeckers is also healthy for the forest anyway, the entire ecosystem. So the prescribed burns help to keep that brush down and keep it in, you know, every 2 or 3 years, do the same thing to keep that down. So we do some of that. We're kind of limited on what we can do and how big we can do it on the Jones because of 45, because of all the houses around us. Other places we can burn a little more freely, but it's harder on the Jones to get a bunch of that done. But you can see here the burn, yeah, it got the vegetation brown and some of that's dead and will eventually fall over. Some of it may sprout back. We protect the cavity trees by raking away any fuels away from that tree so it misses those cavity trees. But, you know, it's going to come back nice and green. And thought I had,
Question.
yes.
Why 7 feet on the yopon?
They just had to give us a number. So ideally they want our habitat to have this kind of basal area and only 1 hardwood tree per acre. And then they just gave us a number of 7. Try not to let the mid-story get up higher than 7 feet. Sometimes it does. When it gets higher than that, then the woodpeckers start leaving the area. So I guess they just had to pick a number that if gets to 7, it's going to get up to 10 or 12 really quickly. And so they say, ideally, you know, they don't ban us or anything or fine us for having 12-story high mid-story, but they just gave us that number. Ideally, from their scientific research, they found that they do better when it's not over 7 feet in the mid-story. So you can see it greens back pretty quick. I'm sure y'all heard already about the, let me see if this will work. Also, another option is sometimes when it's way up and high and out of control, the fire would either burn too hot, or if we're not able to burn, or it's just too far gone, we can use a mulcher. I call it a glorified brush hog, but it'll go through it, mulch out some of those stems. You have to follow that up with either herbicide or prescribed fire the next year, or it ticks off things like the yopon and the sweet gum, and it comes back with a vengeance, comes back worse. So you still have to manage it after that, but it makes it much more manageable if you can do that. And see if this will work. That would work. Anyway, but it's just a short version of where it kind of mulches in there. You don't want to be standing anywhere near that thing when it does that, but and we have larger and smaller ones. Now we have a couple of our own. We've had some mitigation work done on the forest for them widening the highway and the feds gave us money for doing whatever they took in a potential woodpecker habitat. They gave us money to do mulching, so we did some of that before we ever had our own machines. So this is good. It doesn't have to be, we don't want it down to bare dirt. And this is good. It takes care of that. And depending on how many times you go across it, it may mulch down some of the stuff that you've already knocked down with the mulcher more. So it probably doesn't even have to be this clean, but this is nice, but it still leaves enough area. You don't want bare soil, but you could, it's gonna leave the sunlight's gonna come through, and it's gonna have more of our fruit and flower producing plants come through, which are good for wildlife. And it also, you want vegetation to come up because that's the breeding area for the insects that they eat so much. And they'll come, they climb up the trees. So here's a before and after. And sometimes we have to herbicide when we can't do the burning or mulching when we need to. Another good tool, and it's also a benefit to Boy Scouts or Eagle Scout candidates. So when they put in a proposal for helping an endangered species, they always get accepted. So I've worked with several families of Boy Scouts, which are Eagle Scout candidates, and part of it is leadership abilities, and they have to get together a whole group and lead that effort. And Boy Scouts with hatchets and bow saws, and only the old bigger ones can use the axes. But they'll come out there and they can clear up an area really quickly, and then they can help get their Boy Scout designation. So this is one of the great groups that came out there. This lady here, Connor, is the one who planted the longleaf pine that's in front of the office there. So here's a before, Boy Scouts, during and after. So, and I just have them, they can't do the whole area like a woodpecker needs, but I just say the immediate area around the cavity trees. And you can get a pretty good area done. They just spread out the brush that they cut so it can decompose later on in the forest, not a pile that's gonna burn and hurt trees. And master naturalists. One time, bless their hearts, in August, one year when we were first going to be able to move birds onto our forest, we had to have a stand that woodpeckers weren't living in, new artificial cavities in there, and get rid of a lot of the mid-story. Well, these guys, they volunteered, and some were Heartwood, and some may have been like Gulf Coast, and maybe one other one. But anyway, they came out there and with their little hand tools out there, and I made them, I said, only stay till noon and you leave because it's hot. So this is June, July, and August they were doing this. And they helped to, there's Crean right there, y'all probably know him. And so they did very well, just like the Scouts. And so they did a very good job there, made it more open for us. Now, when we do management for the red cockaded woodpecker, it's not just good for just the woodpecker. We're not just managing for one species. The prescribed fire is a healthy forest management tool anyway. And then also the same habitat that the woodpeckers like are good for other rare and different species, like the bobwhite quail, the Bachman sparrow, Louisiana pine snake, which is probably the rarest snake in North America, but it's listed now as threatened, and Texas trailing phlox, which is a rare plant that occurs naturally only in certain counties. Tyler, Hardin, and Polk, I think. Let me know when I'm just like too far, because I think I've been talking a long time. Let me know when it's 5 minutes till or something if I go too long. Translocation efforts are how we're recovering the bird all across the South. By translocation, I mean move from one population, unrelated population, to another to help boost population numbers and enhance the gene pool. So we're part of one translocation cooperative here that involves Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. There's other translocation efforts across the South and Southeast. We meet once a year. There are certain donor populations here in East Texas. Our donor population is the Sam Houston National Forest, where they have most of them that are here in East Texas. And we are a recipient donor population because we are very small in size and very isolated on both of our forests. So the first time we were able to receive birds was 2014. And so I had to go, we got them from the Cockaded National Forest. At the time, the Sam Houston didn't have enough staff and things to help manage like they needed to before and keep track of the birds. And also they were worried about them maybe flying back home if we brought them from there. So we got them from the Cockaded National Forest in Louisiana. So I got in my truck and we were putting birds on both our state forests. And I had a Fish and Wildlife Service biologist that helped me on the Fairchild, and I came down here to the Jones. And just before that, maybe in a picture here, you'll see I broke this hand and couldn't do it. I said, oh, a big day in my career and I can't do it. But someone else volunteered to do it for us. But I was able to drive, so I went to the border of Louisiana and got the birds. And that was like at midnight. So I got back to the Jones State Forest at 3 a.m. And let's tell them how we capture the birds. So I'll finish the RCW, the story there. How we capture the birds, whether it's to translocate the adult birds, not the young, but that climb up and during the daytime and do it. When we're capturing the adult birds or the juvenile birds that are fledged or in their cavity is different. We have to do it at night. We have to wait till they come into roost and we know which trees they're going to and which birds we want. So to capture those birds, we have these aluminum poles that are stacked on top of each other about 8 or 10 feet in length. On the end of the pole is a wire frame with mist net on it. You know what mist net is, real fine threaded net. And so we go up there, we know where the bird is, he's been in there, he was asleep for a while. Then we go up there and plop that thing across the cavity hole. Someone on the ground is taking another pole or a stick and scratching on it like a predator climbing up the tree or something like that, or banging out. Ideally, the bird flies out of the cavity, gets into the mist net, we lower the mist net down and take it off. And this is how I know that, those aren't my hands, but this is how I know that, you know, they've got muscles back in their neck that are made for pecking against trees, and it does murder on your knuckles. So this guy got bloody knuckles too.
Oh,
And
no.
so we're taking them out of the mist net. It's nighttime and it's dark and they're screaming bloody murder. Rah, rah, so you can hear it all across the forest. And all the Jones will think, what are those people living in that house? What are they thinking? You know? So everybody take them out of the net, band them or whatever, or if we're capturing them for moving somewhere else, they're already banded, so they've already been banded as young. So if we're taking them somewhere else, we put them into a box and they put the data on the box, so we know which one's male, which one's female, what the band colors are, where they came from.
What about the female that goes with, what about the couple?
Yeah, we find if we're going to move them into a place, like if we're moving a pair into a brand new fresh place, like the pictures of us fixing there, they'll know if it's male or female once they have the bird, or maybe even if they were able to tell before it was banded by the bands and everything. So I'll take one male from one family group, a female from another family group, and kind of pair
No,
them
but
up
they
there.
mate for life.
Right, yeah, so we've picked them there. These are juvenile birds. They haven't mated yet when we get them. And so we just pick a bird here or there. They used to move adults when there was excess adults, but those adults would always fly back somewhere. They found they had more success moving the juvenile birds, which were hatched that year. So we're capturing, I'm glad you said that, because I didn't mention that. So we're capturing non-adult birds, unless it was like a nature of something, like in Kentucky and they moved them south. But we're capturing, in this one, we're capturing the juvenile birds, which were hatched that year. So they're 6 months old. And we know the gender of them, get 2 unrelated ones, we put them together, take them to our forest where we're all ready for them because we have these artificial cavities in the tree. And this is the guy that helped me the first year. We put the female in one tree, male in another tree. And if we had a second pair that we've always gotten 2 pairs, we go to another part of the forest that's already for them and do the same thing. We put them in the trees. And then, so they're not freaked out, like, you know, they've traveled, like these birds traveled from Louisiana. They had to listen to me sing to the radio all the way there. They're already freaked out and they're pulled from their home and they're stuck into another hole. We have to put that wire mesh on there to keep them in there and we lightly tack it. And then I tie strings to it. So it's tough enough where the bird can't get out and fly off and get eaten by an owl or something else. And then we wait till morning time. And just as it's getting daylight, when the birds would normally wake up anyway, the birds that are inside there are going to start pecking on the wire. And then I wait till the other one is pecking on the wire. So I have my volunteers down there holding the strings. And when I say go, they jerk back and pull the wire off the string and the birds, she got to get out of school a couple times to help. and when they're popping, her dad is an awesome photographer. So he got these pictures right here and they fly out. They stop for a little bit. Hopefully they meet, fall in love and stay together. Sometimes that happens and a lot of times it does not. And all the birds where we put them, they didn't stay there, but I found them on other parts of the forest. So like one of the females, Louisiana females, took up breeding spot on the north side of our forest. So we have some Cajun blood out there. And so that's beautiful pictures there. So there's the ladders. There I'm standing on the ladders. I've got my rope down here. Because that's how I pulled the boxes up there with. So the second year, 2018, I got to do it myself. And 2027, I did it myself. I'm 2021. And we're due again to do it this year too. if there's enough birds to go around.
Does that help with the gene pool?
Yes, that's the big deal. Yeah, it helps boost population numbers, but the main thing is the gene pool, because we're stagnant where we are. There's not a lot of influx coming from the other forests, you know. In a natural case where there's thousands of acres and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres, yeah, they can fly in between it, but our gene pool needed enhancing. So it does help the gene pool, so that's a big part of it. And this is just another picture of, I tied 2 strings on this because when I got up there, I said, this string isn't very strong. I'm gonna make sure, and I'm not sure if those nails are loose enough, so I made sure it was really done. This one isn't as, the camera, oh, there's the bird, you can see it flying out. That's what that circle was. There's the bird flying out. Probably wasn't as good as of a camera as this one taking that picture, but that's the bird coming out after we release them. So current status, I don't have the 24 numbers yet, but this is 2023. The top line is the Sam Houston. That's where most of our woodpeckers are. And the red is Davy Crockett, the green is Angelina, and the purple Sabine. And that's their populations over the many years. And when you go way back farther, the populations start boosting up all across the South when they start using those artificial cavities. So in the 90s, they started popping up. So you can see how the populations have grown here on both the forest right there. They're slowly holding their own, especially on these with the smaller populations are holding their own, but increasing. Sam Houston has increased quite a bit. So if I have time to go through this, I'm gonna do it really quickly because I have a feeling I'm running out of time. But every 5 years, Fish and Wildlife Service looks at their many list of endangered species, animals, plants, you know, fish, mollusks, things like that, insects. And they pick several species and do what's called a 5-year review. They go off any land managers that have us on our state forest, the national forest and things like that, that have any of those species. They say, we're reviewing what are the populations like if we decide to downlist or delist the animal, or how are we going to manage for them and that sort of thing. So I go through and find out scientific information like the populations and what's going on around them and what's the future look like for them. So they conduct those, and then after 5 years, they'll make a determination. The determination can either be, we're gonna leave it where it's at. You know, things are okay, but they're either getting worse, like if it's endangered, they're getting worse, or they haven't improved enough for us to downlist it to threaten. We're gonna leave it where it's at, or it's doing great. And the population's fine, everybody can still manage for them, so they may take them totally off the list. And then the other one is they may downlist it. So with the red cockaded woodpecker was one of those this past time that, well, like this shows the gray wolf. And in multiple states, they delisted it because they weren't there. Let's see, in Texas, you know, that they weren't there, so they just delisted it. Red cockaded woodpecker, they have proposed to go from endangered to down to threatened. And we don't have the final results of that yet. It's been a couple of years at least. And we don't have the final results, but you know, people are protesting and they're looking for more scientific evidence. You know, they're not just gonna go by people's feelings. This is a lovely bird. I grew up with this bird. They're not gonna go by that. They have to have scientific evidence that it's doing really poorly and that sort of thing. So it's still proposed, but they're with more reviews and getting more information and more public input. We haven't heard the word on that yet. Least tern was listed as endangered in Texas, but they delisted it because it's more an interior population. If it comes through here, it's just passing through. It's not, they're taking it off the list there. So we still haven't heard about the woodpecker. They're still endangered and listed as endangered. And we already said when they did that review that we would still manage for them the same on our state forest as we have been doing. So where can we see them? You probably know some places. They're on all of our state forests. You can go to their website on how to get to those forests. The Sam Houston has a viewing area, for what I understand, still has active birds down there on 1375. And there's their phone numbers if you want to check on viewing some of their birds on the Jones State Forest, which some of you will see today. We're open daylight hours, of course. During nesting season, we block off some of it, but if you have good spotting scopes or good lenses, you can still see some things from a distance. And you can see the urbanization around us. There's the W.G. Jones State Forest right there. And it is all, you know, I've told people, you know, on the forest, I can throw a rock on 3 sides of the forest and hit a house. And it's really, it's got even more urban than this, probably more developed than this. And one time I said, that guy said, hey, I live in one of those houses, so I don't really do that. But so that shows us, you see how isolated it is. That's how hard it is to get influx from other populations. And it's hard for them to travel because between us and the Sam Houston, there's a lot of development as well.
Wow.
So it's not much of a travel corridor, and it's not showing up on my thing, but okay. So on the Great Texas Coastal Birding Trail in Jones State Forest, a lot of people use this for birding and for horseback riding and for just hiking and biking and things like that. And on the ID Fair and there's that. Oh, we're so modern that we have to put some things that are prohibited on the forest around the woodpeckers, and we're prohibited use of remote controlled devices such as drones and aircraft. We didn't used to have to say that, but now we have to say that because that could be, be a mess with the drones by the birds in certain areas. And the ID Fairchild State Forest is also, I nominated it, and we have it on the birding trail up there. And it's in Cherokee County, right between Maydale and the river. And we're not as isolated there. A lot of it is farmland around it, but it's still a lot of forested area, but still we're way off of other populations. So it's very isolated out that way. And there's the National Forest where the birds are going to be. Angelina National Forest near Boykin Springs. It's a neat place to go anyway. And they've got a lot of longleaf pine down there. So it's real pretty there. And the Boykin Springs, the little area where the springs are and the creeks and the lake and everything are real pretty. And then there's an old sawmill down past that as well. So Old Aldridge Sawmill goes this way, but the Boykin Springs Recreation Area is right there, a real nice area where you can see woodpeckers. And so it's master naturalists. I get a lot of information from birders, and some of them are master naturalists. If they can see, sometimes they'll say, oh, I saw a red cockaded woodpecker. And if they can get even just one color of the color bands, they'll sometimes report it to the office, or the office will give them my email or something like that. And they'll either send me a picture or a color band and where on the forest that they located it. So that helps a lot. And seeing the color bands is sometimes kind of difficult, and sometimes they get sap on them and hard to tell. But this one right here gave me a lot of information because I could tell what colors were on this leg. Even if I couldn't see the other leg, I know usually it's always different on the right leg anyway. So I could see that without even knowing what's on the other leg. And so a picture will help me see that. And even if you can't tell the colors, you can kind of give me an idea of the colors, and that'll help out right there. Just looking for those bands on both legs will have bands, but the right leg is going to help me more because it's going to have 3 colors on most of them. This one, when somebody took this picture, I saw that light blue over this band. I said, oh, I don't even use light blue. That one came from Louisiana. So I knew the colors that came on the Louisiana birds, and they put their silver band on the right hand side. And that told me that it was one of the Louisiana birds, and that ended up being a breeding female for several years in that area right there. That can help me out there. Sometime if you're on the forest, and this is why I gave you these. If you find a tree that does not have a flagging or ribbon around it or the green paint on it, and it looks like red cockaded woodpecker, if you can get a latitude, longitude on that and send it to me, and then I can go check it out later on. So you may find some, I don't get to survey the whole forest very often. So you can find that. And this book right here is in the very center of this booklet. It's got photos of things that are red cockaded woodpecker cavities and some that are not. And if you can remember the fresh sap and the red bark of the tree that's been flaked away, that'll help you know if it's active or inactive. But if you find one that's not marked, still mark it and let me know, and I can go check, see if it's a new tree. I'll name it after you because I've done that with others. And I've got one that's the Academy tree, and I've got one that's a Cooper tree. So again, I've already told you all the characteristics, so I don't have to go through each of these slides. These, especially this one on the left. Yeah, there's activity, it looks old activity there, but the sap is either gray or a dull, even on the right hand side, it's a dull yellow, bronzy color, not very sappy. So that's an old tree that they don't use anymore. But you can tell by the pictures. I forgot to put that in here. So good. But you've got the books there that can tell you what may or may not be a woodpecker cavity tree, and read those. So hopefully with all the efforts that we're doing now and the extra habitat management work that we can do to help this bird continue. I think that's it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry.